A boy was playing video games on his computer. He had been a neet for 10 years. The next morning, he went downstairs and sat at the table for lunch. His mother asked if he had found a job because his father wouldn't be able to work forever. She also asked what his plan was for when they were no longer around. Hearing this, he got upset and angrily told her that she was being annoying. She replied that he always said, I've got it, but nothing ever changed. Frustrated, he stood up and said he lost his appetite, then started to walk away. He knew he was acting wrong, but after graduating from high school, he went on to an average university and graduated. Things weren't too bad at first, but that's when his problems began. He tried hard to find a good job even before graduating, but he failed to get one, which caused him to lose all his motivation. He started receiving messages from friends saying they'd gotten job offers. When they asked him about his situation, he felt disappointed and ignored their questions. As he walked upstairs, his mother mentioned their neighbor, who had a successful job and even an adorable child now. Suddenly, a courier arrived with a package. The boy went to the door and was shocked to see the parcel. His mother came over, curious, and asked if he was buying things even though he didn't have any money. He quickly said that he probably won a prize again because he hadn't bought anything. He often entered online giveaways to distract himself from the guilt of not having a job, but sometimes he received adult items which he couldn't let his parents see. That's why he went ahead to confirm the delivery himself. The courier asked if he would sign for the package, and the boy noticed the courier giving him a strange look. He wondered if it was because a man in his 30s was home in the middle of a weekday. Looking around, he saw that other people were also staring at him more boldly than usual. The parcel was small and his mother glanced at it, wondering if it was some kind of food, and then walked away. He went into his room, opened the parcel, and found a note and a disc inside. The disc had the title, Village of Fate, written on it, and he wondered if it was some kind of game. He read the note, which explained that he had been chosen to test the game. The note said that the game had the latest AI technology and was the first in the world to create characters that could think and act like real humans. He thought that sounded a bit exaggerated. He continued reading the game's description and the rules. One of the conditions was that he had to promise not to share any details about the game online. He found it strange that there wasn't any official agreement, and the promise just seemed like a basic contract. Another rule was that he needed to stay connected to the internet while playing, and if the villagers in the game died, he wouldn't be able to play the game ever again. That rule surprised him, and he thought it was a little harsh. Curious, he searched the name Village of Fate online but didn't find any results. He started to wonder if the game might be full of viruses, so he decided to play it on his old PC. If it turned out to be a prank, he figured he could share the story as a joke on Reddit. When he inserted the disc, the game's title appeared on the screen. He pressed enter to start, and that's when the first scene appeared. He was shocked by the incredibly high-definition graphics, better than anything he had ever seen. He saw some villagers riding in a carriage, and suddenly, monsters attacked them. He wondered if the villagers were about to be hunted. A girl holding a holy book kept repeating God of Fate as if she was praying for help. He moved his cursor, thinking that the monsters were going to take down the horse. Suddenly, the man driving the carriage tried to defend it, and a bright light began shining from the holy book. Within seconds, the whole screen was filled with light. Confused about what had just happened, the next scene showed the villagers happily talking to each other while standing in the middle of the forest. He realized that this was probably where the actual game was about to begin. He moved the cursor over the characters and could see their background stories. The man driving the carriage was named Gams, a 26-year-old swordsman. The girl with the holy book was named Chem, a 19-year-old priestess who believed in the god of fate. She was Gam's younger sister. He noticed that they didn't look alike and started to wonder if the game was made in Japan, thinking it must have been very expensive to produce. With such high-quality CG, he thought it should be a hot topic online, but decided to check that later. He was more curious to see the descriptions of the other characters. He checked the remaining 3 characters and realized they were all part of the same family. Finding this interesting, he started wondering what the game's controls were. So he began looking for the instruction paper again. He also noticed that the game wasn't fully voiced, as the conversations appeared in text on the screen. In the game, Gams apologized to the others, explaining that it was his job to protect the village, but all he could do during the monster attack was give them a chance to escape. Carol, his little sister, happily asked him about the bright light they had just seen. Chem, Gam's other sister, told Carol that Gams was her big brother. The boy playing the game noticed that Gams was handsome, strong, and had a beautiful sister, so he thought Gams must be the main character. Gams then told Chem that it was childish to treat Carol like that, and Chem apologized. Carol giggled, seeing her sister get scolded. The boy started to enjoy the game, as he really liked the characters' personalities and backgrounds. Layla and Rhodus, the other characters, also wondered about the light. Chem explained that the mysterious light had come from the Bible she was holding. The boy then received instructions that he had to write a prophecy for the villagers every day. He had now become the god of the game and was responsible for guiding the villagers to prosperity. When he read the instructions, he was stunned and couldn't fully understand them at first. He thought the game might only be able to recognize simple sentences or words, so he wrote a sentence, thinking that if the AI could even understand a small part of it, it would be an amazing game. After he wrote the prophecy and pressed enter, a light appeared on the Bible. The girl, Chem, opened it and started reading, telling the others they had received a prophecy from the god of fate. Everyone got excited and started praying. Since no one except Chem could read, they asked her to read the prophecy for them. Chem read aloud a command to harvest trees and secure a place to live, all phrased in a prophecy-like way. The boy was completely shocked. He pulled back from his chair in disbelief. He hadn't expected it to work so perfectly. Seeing the characters understand and respond to what he wrote left him amazed, and he couldn't believe that technology like this existed. He thought to himself that if the characters could understand and react like that, then this game was truly unbelievable. He thought for a moment that the characters might just be following some pre-programmed actions, but then he noticed they were discussing how to harvest trees and secure a place to sleep. Rhodus mentioned they could cut down trees from the forest, but they wouldn't be able to use the wood as timber right away because it needed time to dry after being cut. Chem was surprised to learn this, and even the boy playing the game was shocked as he didn't know about that process either. Rhodus then explained how drying wood worked, and Chem, feeling a bit guilty, said she hadn't researched about that before. The boy also thought the same, realizing he didn't know much about it either. Rhodus then reassured everyone, saying there must be a reason behind God's plan, so there was no harm in cutting down the trees and letting them dry. With that, they gathered their tools and headed towards the trees to start working. The boy realized that Gams and Rhodus were in charge of harvesting the trees while the girls were walking around looking for anything edible. He noticed he could use the scroll wheel on his mouse to zoom in and out of the scene. As he zoomed out, he saw a long, narrow area in the distance and guessed it might be the path they'd used to escape on the carriage earlier. He started to wonder how he could progress the game and whether it might actually be running in real time. He couldn't believe it and thought to himself that it was impossible for a game like this to exist. Suddenly, an explanation about fate points appeared on the screen. These points were granted based on how much the villagers felt indebted to the god of fate, which was him. He noticed that he currently had 97 points, and these points could be used to bring about miracles. The instructions explained that the more residents he had, the more fate points he would earn, and making the villagers happy would also increase his points. Curious, he looked at the list of miracles he could perform. Some of them included helping the escaped villagers reunite or causing a traveling peddler or doctor to show up. He realized he could influence people's fate but not control them directly. However, he could control things like the weather, which made him feel powerful, almost like a god. Unsure where to spend his limited points, he decided to listen closely to the villagers' conversation to decide how best to use them. He scrolled over to Gams and Rhodus and noticed that Rhodus was trying to talk to Gams, but Gams wasn't saying much. Curious about what the girls were discussing, he shifted the screen to them and saw they were talking about food. He thought summoning a peddler might be helpful since they could buy food from him. The villagers mentioned they only had food for 2 weeks and heard that he thought he should consider instructing Gams to go investigate that area tomorrow. But then he hesitated, wondering if it was a good idea to send their only fighter away from the group. Instead, he thought about using Carol, who wasn't doing much, to explore and expand the visible area. Just then, Carol picked up a mushroom and Layla quickly told her to drop it because it was poisonous. Seeing the situation, the boy thought to himself that if his careless actions led to the villagers' downfall, he'd feel guilty. He wondered if there was another miracle he could use to help. He spotted a miracle called Familiar and considered whether using it might expand the visible area of the map. But then, he stressed over the fact that even a simple dog or cat would cost 300 fate points, which he couldn't afford. As he lowered his head, feeling the pressure over a mere game, he noticed there was another option to increase fate points: a payment system. He realized that he could get 10 fate points by paying 1,000 yen, which frustrated him as a neet because he wasn't earning any money. He figured that if he spent 20,000 yen, he could get a cat or dog, and with enough points, he could ensure the villagers lived a comfortable life. But then, he checked his bank account. and he saw he only had 10,852 yen. He started thinking about selling his books, games, and unopened prizes online to get more money. After thinking this over, he returned his focus to the game and noticed that the villagers were preparing to sleep at 9 o'clock. Rhodus asked Gams why he wasn't going to bed, and Gams replied that someone had to stay awake in case a monster appeared. Rhodus reassured him, saying that with the power of God, no monsters would come near them. The boy realized how much trust the villagers had placed in him, but he knew he didn't have those kinds of powers. He thought about telling them that their god wasn't all-powerful and had limitations, but worried that doing so might weaken their faith and gratitude towards him. He started looking at how wood was processed in the game and thought about how long it had been since he had paid attention to anything like that. Lately, all he did was watch entertainment videos or scroll through funny posts on Reddit. He wondered if he wasn't a neet, maybe he could give the villagers an easier, more comfortable life. Suddenly, he stood up, realizing he was regretting his past over a game. He thought games were supposed to be just for fun, not something that made him feel bad. As he sat back down, he felt a sharp pain in the scar of his stomach, which brought back a painful memory. He remembered when his little sister was in danger and he got into a fight with a boy on the street. That boy stabbed him in the stomach with a knife. At that moment, he had left something important behind and ran for it, and that's when everything started going downhill. With sadness in his eyes, he stood up from his chair, thinking he just wanted to lose himself in gaming because he felt like there was nothing else left for him to do. The next morning, he opened his eyes and realized it was already daylight. He remembered looking up wood manufacturing last night but had fallen asleep without even realizing it. He checked the time. It was 7 a.m. He couldn't remember the last time he woke up that early. He walked over to his computer and saw that everyone in the game was already up and working. It hit him that the villagers really did live in real time. He started thinking about what kind of prophecy he should give them next, but his thoughts were interrupted by the growling of his stomach. He realized he was hungry and remembered he hadn't eaten dinner last night because he'd been so focused on the game. Glancing around, he saw the empty snack wrappers, realizing even those were finished. So, he went downstairs, wondering if there was anything left in the fridge. As he approached the kitchen, he heard the voices of his family having breakfast at the dining table. Ever since the incident with his younger sister, he'd had a huge argument with his father about finding a job, and they hadn't spoken directly since. For a moment, he thought about going in, greeting them with a smile, and asking if he could join them for breakfast, but then he found the idea ridiculous. They were all eating to fuel themselves for the day ahead, working hard, while he had no job and nothing to show. How could he face them like that? Instead, he turned around, went back to his room, and started doing some muscle exercises. He remembered how he had run away that time and felt the need to counter the weakness he still carried inside. While training, he glanced at his computer screen and noticed Carol working alongside the others. They all seemed happier than him, even though it was just a game. He thought to himself that, despite it being virtual, they were living more fulfilling lives than he was. Feeling guilty, he decided to warn them not to put too much faith in an incompetent god like him. So he wrote the prophecy of the day. Chem announced they had received the prophecy and the villagers gathered around her, excited to hear it. After she read it, there was a heavy silence. The boy grew anxious, wondering if they were disillusioned with their god, who seemed to be making excuses. He regretted giving them that message, but then Chem broke the silence, praising how wonderful it was that their god was still watching over them. Rhodus added that perhaps their god had lost powers because of his battles against the devils. They had taken the prophecy positively, and his fate points increased to 110. He realized the points were increasing too slowly. At that rate, he wouldn't be able to provide them with a better life anytime soon. He overheard them talking about how uncomfortable it was to sleep in the wagon, and how they needed a defense wall or fence to protect themselves from monsters. Listening to their struggles, he wished he had more fate points to help them, but he couldn't afford to waste the few he had. The only way to earn more fate points was through the in-game payment system. He had already listed his unopened items for sale and expected to get 20 to 30,000 yen from them. He looked at his books and considered selling them to a store to get more cash. The problem was he hadn't gone outside in months, but he knew if he didn't make these sacrifices, these villagers could be utterly defeated and he wouldn't be able to play the game again. After thinking through everything, he decided to go outside. He put on some better clothes, realizing they fit him well even though he hadn't gained any weight. As a kid, he had imagined growing into a more refined adult in his 30s, thinking it would happen naturally. Now he promised himself he'd continue the game tomorrow. Just as he was about to leave, he saw Carol in the game fall and injure herself. It made him sad to see her struggle. Despite her injury, she gathered her wood sticks and kept walking. He also noticed that everyone in the game looked tired, realizing today was tougher than usual for them. Determined, he grabbed his bag of books and thought to himself that he'll do his best too. As he approached the door, his mom, surprised, asked if he was heading out and wondered what was going on. He simply said he'd be back soon. He took his bicycle and hit the road. People stared at him oddly, judging him as he passed. Thinking of the villagers in his game, he pedaled faster and soon reached the bookstore. Once inside, he looked around, wondering if he could find any book that might help him with managing villagers. He noticed a book about different worlds but realized it didn't match exactly the game's situation. Plus, he couldn't afford to buy something new. After selling his old books, he stepped outside and saw a bakery he used to visit with his family. He decided to go in and look at the desserts. He bought 4 puddings and headed back home. When he handed them to his mom, she smiled and asked if they were for her. He said he got enough for everyone and quickly rushed to his room, feeling a little embarrassed. He thought to himself that he shouldn't feel so proud for doing just one small nice thing, wondering what he was doing with his life at his age. After spending 20,000 yen, he finally had the 310 fate points. He watched as the villagers cooked dinner and sat together. He wondered what kind of miracle he should use next. There was a feature that allowed him to review their past conversations, but he felt uneasy about it, thinking it might be like eavesdropping. Still, he decided to test it out. When he clicked on it, he could suddenly hear their conversations from earlier in the day while he was away. They were talking about how nice the weather was, and Layla mentioned wanting to bathe in the river. Chem, however, pointed out that there were many men around. Layla winked and joked that she wasn't too worried about being seen since both her husband and daughter were used to it. She also teased that Gams wouldn't be interested in the body of an old lady like her. She added that Carol wouldn't mind if Gams saw her either, so it was all fine. After hearing this, he thought that maybe he didn't need to worry too much about Layla or Carol, but Chem's brother complex was definitely more serious than he expected. Suddenly, he read that Layla was wondering about the swarm of monsters that had attacked their village, mentioning how the villagers were scattered in the blink of an eye. Yoshio was confused, wondering what day she was talking about. As he continued to listen to their conversation, he realized they were referring to a village made of magnificent stone. Curious, he gathered more information and discovered that there had been once almost 100 villagers. After the monster attacked, they were all forced to flee, each escaping on horse-drawn wagons, much like the ones they were traveling in now. That's when he understood the purpose of the miracle Reunite Villagers. It was meant to bring together those villagers who had escaped and been separated. Just as he was thinking about reuniting them, his mother called out, telling him that dinner was ready. He went to the dining room and noticed his father sitting at the table. It was unusual to see him home this early. Ever since he became a neet, they only saw each other face to face a few times each month. He tried to start a conversation, but his father didn't seem interested in talking. Instead, his father asked if Sayuki, his younger sister, was working overtime. Unlike him, Sayuki was hardworking and had successfully entered the field she wanted. She often said that working late didn't bother her at all. Their mother then mentioned that she had received some handmade tsukemono from Okiku and asked if he wanted to try some. She explained that the weather was nice, so she took a short walk in the park where she ran into Okiku, and afterward they went shopping together. Okiku was an elderly landlady who lived in a large old house nearby. When he was a child, she would often bring them candy. He realized that the only reason he wasn't kicked out of the house despite being in need was because his father worked hard and had a stable income. After finishing his meal, he thanked his parents and stood up. His mother told him to take a pudding with him and asked his father if he would like some dessert too, mentioning that their son had bought it for them. His father, sounding uninterested, replied that he would have some. Feeling disappointed, he went back to his room and started checking on the villagers in the game. He noticed that everyone except Gams had gone to the horse wagons. Gams stood out as a dependable figure with quiet strength, much like his own father. Chem could use healing magic, but she wasn't suited for battle, so both she and the villagers relied heavily on Gams. There was an option to summon more people, but it cost too many points. There was a cheaper alternative to summon a random person, but it felt risky. What if the random person turned out to be a criminal or someone dangerous? He decided it was wiser not to take that gamble. He also wanted to save points for a familiar, so he figured it was better to hold off on something. Realizing how much stress this game was causing him, he thought it would be best to sleep and figure things out tomorrow. Just as he was about to get up from his chair, a notification suddenly popped up. Attack. He quickly alerted everyone to wake up. Chem, sounding stressed, asked what was happening. Gams told her that monsters were attacking and warned everyone not to leave the wagon under any circumstances. Rhodus told his wife and daughter to stay inside the wagon because it was a dangerous situation. Gams, staying calm, reassured everyone that he would handle it and asked Chem to be ready to use her healing magic if needed. Yoshio felt incredibly stressed. The area was too dark for him to see the monsters, and he didn't know where they were. Suddenly, 2 stray dogs appeared. Yoshio knew Gams was strong, but it was 2 against 1, and he became even more anxious. He considered using a miracle for help, but before he could act, the monsters attacked Gams. Gams fought back fiercely with a sword and managed to kill both of them. After the fight, Gams sat on a log, exhausted. His sister ran toward him with a smile, asking if he was okay, but suddenly, Gams collapsed, and everyone froze in shock. Yoshio shouted his name, realizing it hadn't been a flawless victory. His sister began crying, holding him in her arms. She was panicking, shouting that Gam's body was getting cold. Meanwhile, outside the screen, Yoshio was trying to figure out what was happening. Rhodus checked his pulse and tried to calm her down. He noticed bite marks on Gam's arm, realizing that the monster bite had poisoned him. Rhodus asked Chem if she could use antidote magic. Yoshio started to relax, thinking her healing magic would fix everything. But then Chem said she hadn't learned antidote magic yet. Desperately, Rhodus asked if there were any antidotes in their supplies, but Gam shook his head, indicating they had none. Carol stood in shock, unable to believe what was happening. Chem, crying, started begging her brother not to leave her. In her desperation, she shouted at God, pleading for help to save her older brother and promising she would do anything. Yoshio panicked, unsure of what to do. If Gams died, everything would be over, and he wondered if there was anything he could do. Clenching his fists, he tried to calm himself, reminding himself that he was the god in this game. He remembered there was an option to reverse the situation and frantically searched for it. Instead, he found a miracle called Traveling Doctor Shows Up, which costs 300 fate points. He hesitated, debating whether to use it. What if the doctor didn't arrive in time? It was a gamble. He started shouting in frustration, worried about the outcome. Suddenly, his mom yelled from downstairs, telling him to quiet down. Realizing how loud he had been, he thought that even if a doctor did show up in the middle of the night, it might seem suspicious to the villagers. After thinking it over for a moment, Yoshio decided to use the miracle. A traveling doctor suddenly appeared in the village. Chem, shocked and angry, demanded to know who he was. The doctor calmly told them not to worry and introduced himself as a traveling physician. Yoshio smiled, thinking it was natural for them to be suspicious of him. To ease their concerns, he revealed a prophecy, and Chem, surprised by a prophecy coming so late at night, read it with heartfelt gratitude toward God. The doctor then asked to examine Gams, and everyone watched anxiously. He pulled out an antidote and applied it to Gam's wound. Slowly, Gams began to feel better. His pain faded, and his body temperature returned to normal. Everyone was relieved and happy to see Gams recovering. Yoshio, feeling much more relaxed, even wondered whether the doctor was male or female. Meanwhile, Rhodus began reading the prophecy aloud. In it, Yoshio had explained how he guided the doctor to them and reminded them that, although their struggles would continue, they should never forget that their god was watching over them. Yoshio, trying to sound like a true god, wondered how it came across. Seeing the villagers' happy expressions, he felt reassured that he had done a good job. The next day, the girls were gathering ingredients for food while Rhodus was practicing with a sword to protect everyone. Suddenly, a rabbit rustled through the bushes, and the noise startled Rhodus, causing him to fall down. Meanwhile, the doctor was busy preparing herbs for Gam's treatment. Suddenly, Chem asked the doctor why he came this way, and he explained that his family had been doctors for generations, and this place called the Forbidden Forest was full of monsters, but also rich in herbs. The previous night, after finishing gathering herbs and preparing to set up camp, he saw a bright light in the distance. At first, he wasn't sure if he should go towards it, but eventually, he decided to follow the light. Chem smiled and said it must have been God's guidance. The doctor replied that while they valued nature above all and didn't particularly believe in God, it could have been an act of God. Yoshio realized that the doctor was agnostic. He acknowledged the possibility of God's existence, but didn't fully believe in it. Chem asked the doctor if he would be leaving soon. The doctor replied that he couldn't abandon his patient, even though the worst part was over. He then asked if they would allow him to stay a bit longer, as he had some time to spare. With a big smile, Chem agreed, saying he could stay as long as he liked. However, she mentioned that they didn't have any proper shelter at the moment and asked if he was okay with that. Yoshio smiled, thinking it was good that the doctor would stay with him, but he also realized the issue. Since the doctor was there, the wagon was now full, so someone would have to sleep outside. Even though Gams was saved, it would still take a few days for him to fully recover. Yoshio then thought that they needed a safe place to live, so he began considering how to use his fate points wisely. Suddenly, the doctor mentioned that there was a cave nearby, a ruin left by miners. He said it would provide shelter from the wind and rain, and they might even find some leftover tools there. Yoshio was relieved to hear that the doctor knew of such a place. Rhodus, excited, asked the doctor to lead them to the cave. Yoshio noticed that the cave was only about 5 minutes away from where they were, so they could easily return later to gather more wood if needed. They finally arrived at the cave and saw a large door in front of them. The doctor mentioned that this door was likely used for transporting goods, as it seemed to be the main entrance. Yoshio thought it must have been a mining area. When they opened the door, they were greeted by a massive space inside. Everyone looked thrilled. Yoshio was also surprised. It was much larger than he had expected. Although it was a bit dirty, there were several rooms scattered around. He noticed that everyone was so absorbed in exploring their new home that they weren't paying attention to the doctor. Chem had placed Gams on the bed and held his hand, telling him that they had safely arrived in a new land. There was also spring water flowing nearby, and there were areas for cooking. The girls were ready to start cleaning the place. Yoshio felt eternally grateful to the doctor for helping them find a place to stay. While the doctor continued treating Gams, Chem went outside and asked everyone to be quiet so they wouldn't wake him. She suggested that they clean the area so that Gams would be surprised when he woke up. Layla told Rhodus to take out anything that was useless, and he agreed, saying he would put these items in the corner. While cleaning, Carol suddenly noticed that there were 4 rooms. With a smile, she shouted that she would make Big Brother Gam's room hers, saying one bed would be enough because she would sleep with her. Chem, watching her from behind, wondered why Gams would share his room with Carol instead of her. She thought to herself that Gams had spoiled Carol a little too much. Yoshio was a bit concerned about the relationship between Carol and Chem, but he figured they generally got along well as fellow villagers. He then thought about how they could finally start building a village now that they had the potential to turn the cave into a livable place. He noticed it was already noon and realized he hadn't eaten anything yet. Feeling hungry, he decided to grab something to eat. Just as he left his room, he suddenly saw his sister Sayuki coming out of hers as well. He was shocked and asked Sayuki if she was on holiday. She replied that she wanted to go downstairs to eat and angrily told him to move aside. He told her that he was going to the first floor too, but she warned him not to use the bathroom there. Hearing that made him even angrier, but since that incident, she had never acted the same way towards him. He didn't say anything, but just assured her that he wouldn't use it. After eating, he returned to his room, thinking about his sister. He remembered how friendly they used to be, often going out to relax together. He wondered if they would still be close siblings if that incident hadn't happened. He felt a pain in his stomach, realizing he had to move on, because even though he felt regret now, he knew there was nothing he could do about it. He then decided to check on the villagers and noticed they had cleaned the place very well. Rhodus asked Layla where Chem was, and she replied that Chem was checking in on Gams. Carol said she wanted to go there too, but Rhodus told her to leave them alone for a while. With a smile, he suggested that she stay with her dad and join him on an expedition to the cave. She agreed, saying that once her big brother got better, she would give him a tour. Meanwhile, Chem entered the room and asked the doctor if she could take care of her brother, urging him to rest. The doctor agreed, saying the symptoms from the poison had settled down and she would accept Chem's offer. She told Chem to summon her immediately if something unusual happened. Chem thanked the doctor and held her brother's hand, letting him know that she was there. Yoshio felt happy to see that Gam's condition was improving. Suddenly, a dream box appeared above Gams. He clicked on it and the screen changed completely. Suddenly, the scene changed, then Yoshio saw a younger Gams. He was surrounded by a whole squad of friends who were inviting him to go out for drinks. Gams politely declined, saying he was heading home because his sister was waiting for him. Yoshio was shocked to see Gams during such an innocent time in his life. When Gams finally reached home, he found his father drinking heavily. Annoyed, Gams remarked that he was drinking again and threw a bottle at him. He then handed his father a pot of coins, which he had promised in exchange for watching over Chem while he was working. Gams asked where Chem was and went downstairs, only to find her lying in a bad condition. He was shocked and asked how many days she had gone without food. Yoshio felt the same shock, wondering if this was child abuse. Gams grew angrier, saying he should have left this place sooner. He started to walk away when his father tried to stop him. The father claimed that he was just careless because he was drunk and assured Gams that he would keep his promise from now on. But Gams picked up his sister and angrily told his father to move aside unless he wanted to die. Gams then went out of the house and Chem asked him where they were going. He replied, "Anywhere but home." She pointed out that if they didn't hurry, their father would really be angry. Gams told her that they wouldn't see him ever again, so there was no need to be scared. Chem then said maybe their mother and father hated her because she was a bad girl and always got scolded. But Gams shouted that that wasn't true. They were the bad ones. He reminded them of the time their parents said they would sell Chem because she was bad and useless, so at least she would be of some use in the end. Yoshio realized they were living in a much worse situation than he had imagined. Gams told Chem not to think of them as her parents anymore, but he promised to take care of her and asked her to live with him, have fun together, be happy. Chem smiled and hugged him, saying that she loved her big brother. Now the screen returned to the present time, and Yoshio realized why Chem had a big brother complex. With such a cool brother, it made sense that she would depend on him. Suddenly, Gams opened his eyes and asked if he had worried his little sister. Tears streamed down Chem's face as she hugged him, relieved to see him speaking. Everyone else appeared at the door, happy to see Gams awake. Yoshio also felt a sense of relief, thinking that finally they were all happy. He knew that everyone depended on Gams. He was a character who would naturally be popular. On top of that, he was handsome and strong. Yoshio was sure that the bond between Chem and Gams would never weaken from now on. As he thought about his own relationship with his sister, he suddenly noticed tears streaming down his face. He was shocked to realize he was crying. He laughed a little, wondering if he regretted things so much that it made him cry. He thought to himself that he really wanted to change. From his windows, he saw his dad and sister walking away together. As they left the house, she asked him if he was wearing the necktie she had given him. Her dad smiled and asked if it looked strange. She smiled back, telling him that it suited him very well. After watching them leave, he walked over to his computer and saw Layla preparing meals with Carol's help, while the doctor and Gams were out on patrol. He looked around, feeling happy to see that they'd all set up the necessary equipment and furnishings for comfortable living. It had been 3 days since they moved into the cave and their way of life improved dramatically. He felt it was worth using that miracle. Meanwhile, Gams had faced a large boar in front of him. The boar charged at him, but Gams dodged the attack. Suddenly, an arrow struck the boar, knocking it out. The archer who fired the arrow was none other than the Dr. Mullis. Mullis walked over to Gams and reminded him not to push himself too hard while he was still recovering. Yoshio checked the doctor's name and noticed that there was no background information except the name, Mullis. Not only was he skilled at making potions, but he was also a master archer, making him a great partner for Gams. Additionally, Mullis could use magic to manipulate plants, and he was the one who had led them to the cave. Yoshio hoped Mullis would join the village permanently, but under the doctor's background info, there was only a box labeled secret and nothing more. Yoshio thought it was strange that Mullis hadn't joined the group yet, especially after he'd already spent 30,000 yen on the game. He realized that this game wasn't as straightforward as he initially thought. Afterward, they returned to the cave where Chem thanked them for the patrol. Carol excitedly welcomed them home. Gams and Mullis handed over the boar meat they had just hunted, and Layla was thrilled to know that they'd be having meat for dinner. However, she pointed out that they were running low on seasoning and salt, which were essential for cooking and preserving the meat. Yoshio found this concerning. He realized that even though the area around the cave had an abundance of natural crops, they still needed a stable food source, like a farm. He thought about calling a peddler to buy seeds and supplies. However, there is also a miracle called Golem that caught his attention. Golems were massive humanoid creatures made of rock, and he could control one directly with his controller, which was really exciting for him. But the cost of summoning a golem was 700 fate points, which equaled to 70,000 yen in real money. As a neet, Yoshio found it impossible to afford that much, especially since he had only accumulated 160 points so far. He earned 10 points daily from the villagers, meaning that it would take him 2 to 3 months to gather enough points. He thought about how he had already used up his savings in the game. Watching how the villagers enjoy their dinner happily, Yoshio felt a bit more relaxed. He stood up from his chair to make a cup of coffee for himself, feeling a mix of contentment and worry. After making his coffee, Yoshio returned with the cup in hand and watched the villagers working. He noticed that Chem and Gams had been working on something together for the past few days, and he wondered what they were making. Chem then said it was almost done and asked Gams if it looked disrespectful. They revealed what they had been working on. It was a statue. Gams reassured Chem, saying that what truly mattered were their feelings, and he was certain their thoughts were reaching God, who is also watching over them. Mullis asked if it was a statue of God, and Chem confirmed it, explaining that although the craftsmanship was rough, they needed a place to worship or make offerings. Yoshio realized it was a statue for him, but because it was carved so crudely, it was difficult to tell if it depicted a male or female figure. He then wondered about the gender of the god of fate. As Chem offered some fruits to the statue, the offerings disappeared before them. Yoshio realized that since God existed in their world, offerings vanishing wasn't particularly surprising. He also noticed that his fate points had increased as a result of the offering. When he read the instructions, he saw that offerings made to him also contributed to raising his fate points. Yoshio decided to talk with the villagers about offering things they didn't need, but he didn't want to burden them or come across as forceful, so he revealed a prophecy to them, suggesting they could offer unnecessary items to him, explaining that he could turn their goods and thoughts into miracles. He was pleased with how he phrased it, as it didn't come off as begging or demanding. The villagers seemed happy as they read the message, their faces lighting up with smiles. Yoshio, however, felt a bit concerned about their innocence. He thought to himself that in modern Japan, people like them might easily fall for scams or join dubious religions. Then again, he realized that they might already be involved in something similar without knowing it. The next day, Yoshio saw Gams and Rhodus offering a large log to him. He realized that they could offer even big items like that, and it struck him how happy they seemed while making offerings to their god. As the villagers prayed and gave their offerings together, he noticed it was already past noon. Time had flown by while he played the game. Suddenly, his mom called out, saying he had received a parcel. He went downstairs and saw it was from the Village of Fate. Thinking it might be some reference material they forgot to send earlier, he mumbled to himself. His mom, curious about what he was saying, opened the parcel before he could stop her. Yoshio told her not to open it so casually, wondering what could it be. When she opened it, they found strange-looking fruits inside. They resembled pears but were red like apples. Yoshio couldn't believe his eyes. These were the exact fruits the villagers had offered him the day before. His mom, thinking they were some exotic fruits he ordered, said they'd eat them for dessert that evening. He caught the scent of the fruits, noticing a faint citrus aroma. It didn't seem artificial at all. Remembering how the villagers enjoyed them, he decided to take a bite. To his surprise, it was the most delicious fruit he'd ever tasted. He figured it might be a thoughtful touch from the game's creators, possibly just a common fruit in some foreign country. Either way, he wasn't complaining since he got to enjoy something so tasty. Feeling satisfied, he returned to his computer and wrote a new prophecy for the villagers. In it, he thanked them for the fruits and assured them that they didn't need to offer food unless they had extra. He reminded them to prioritize themselves first. Smiling, he thought about how once he saved up enough points to obtain a golem, he'd be able to help them even more. Suddenly, his mother shouted for him to come downstairs, and from her tone, he could tell she was a bit irritated. He hurried down and saw a log at the door stamped with the symbol of the Village of Fate. His mother asked what he was planning to do with it, but he was completely stunned. It was the same log the villagers had offered him the day before. He thought to himself, that joke was going too far. He tried to drag the log but quickly realized how heavy it was. His mother asked what he planned to do with it, so he told her he was going to move it to the garden, pretending she had asked him to use it for muscle training. As she struggled with the weight, he thought about how hard Gams and Rhodus must work with such heavy labor. He couldn't take the situation seriously at all and thought about filing a complaint with the game company. However, when he checked the details, he couldn't find a contact number. The return address said Hokkaido, which shocked him. He couldn't believe they would go so far as to send something like that from Hokkaido. He searched online for information about the company but found nothing. He even looked up the address from the package on his laptop and found a small building, which made him doubt that such a tiny company could produce a game of this quality. He started thinking that the actual development might have taken place somewhere else, but the company was so secretive. Either way, he couldn't afford to travel there, and he didn't have the guts to confront them in person, so he sat there, wondering what he should do with the log. The next day, he received a cooler from the villagers, and inside was fresh meat from a monster they had killed. He was completely shocked, and his mom was just as surprised when she saw it. She angrily asked if he was spending money on something shady. Unsure of how to explain, he tried to tell her that he had come up with an idea to help revitalize a village, and the villagers appreciated it so much that they started sending him gifts regularly. To his surprise, she got excited and thought it was amazing, and he was even more shocked that she believed him. He handed her the boar meat and suggested she cooked it. She stared at the meat, baffled, and wondered how on earth she could prepare something like that. Since then, he started receiving daily packages from the Village of Fate. These included various fruits, monster meats, and even crystals used as light sources in the game. He also kept getting more logs, and he wondered if it was possible to buy these items from somewhere, but he had a theory. Maybe this game was designed for wealthy people, where valuable items were gradually sent as tributes to players. Perhaps he had been selected as a test player by mistake. One evening, his mom made a sauté dish with the meat they'd received. As they sat at the dinner table, she asked if he could get more of those fruits because she felt healthier after eating them. He told her that he would ask the villagers about it. She mentioned that even Sayuki liked the meat. His dad chimed in, saying the meat was really delicious with a more natural flavor than what they usually buy from stores. He added that the meat had a texture and taste that made it feel like real quality meat. Seeing his dad talk about it so much reassured Yoshio that he truly enjoyed the food, as it was rare for his dad to speak so enthusiastically. The next day, he was in the garden trying to cut wood with a saw. His father watched as he struggled, finding it really difficult. His dad offered to show him how to do it properly. He suspected his father was helping him because he didn't want the neighbors to see him struggling and get embarrassed. After demonstrating, his father handed the saw back and told him to try again. From that point on, his father started giving him advice regularly, and last weekend, they even made plans together to use the logs to repair the garden fence. He also began thinking about how he could teach the villagers to cook meat. His mother had taught him a lot about cooking, so he had become somewhat decent at it. It had even become a routine for him to have lunch together with the villagers. In the evening, while he was looking for something in the fridge, his sister suddenly came home. Hesitantly, he greeted her, and she was surprised to hear him speak, replying that she was glad to be back. Sitting in his room later, he reflected on how he was able to talk to his family more now, all thanks to the Village of Fate. He began to wonder if he was helping the villagers or if they were actually helping him. Meanwhile, Gams had also built a fence around the cave to ensure their safety. After building the fence, Chem asked her brother if monsters could jump over it. He reassured her, saying not to worry. If any did get over, he and Mullis would handle them. He added that the only real issue was the number of enemies like last time, so there was no point in stressing about it. He then suggested they head inside. Yoshio thought that they seemed more confident about their defense now, but he noticed something was off. They all appeared more tense, even though their situation should have improved. They were trying to act calm, but their restlessness was clear. He also noticed everyone sighed when they looked at the wooden calendar. The last day of the month was marked, and he wondered if something special was set to happen on that day. Everyone was having dinner when Carol asked why everyone looked so gloomy. Rhodus told her that Mama and Papa were doing well and were always affectionate with each other, but she pointed out that everyone sighed whenever they looked at the calendar. Rhodus admitted that they didn't want her to worry, then asked if she remembered how they always told her to stay inside on the last day of the month and go to bed early. She nodded and saying that she remembered because the adults always had really scared faces and got easily angry on that day. She then wondered aloud, if there are so many gods, why is it only the 7 gods, and why are there 12 months in a year? Shouldn't there be 5 more gods? Rhodus smiled at how observant she was and explained that the 7 gods were originally responsible for the 7 days of the week, representing light, moon, fire, water, nature, lightning, and earth. Yoshio realized that their world had a similar system with their Monday to Sunday linked to those elements. He understood the system of their gods better now, realizing that he was one of those gods who followed one of the 7 gods. This helped him grasp the purpose of his position a little more clearly. He learned that there had been conflicts among the gods, leading to a massive battle. The first 31 days of this battle were marked by devastating freezing winds. On the 120th day, the god of nature emerged as the strongest. On the 182nd day, the gods of water and lightning fought fiercely against each other. Then, on the 243rd day, the god of fire exploded with rage. It took a full 365 days for the gods to stop fighting. As a result of this long conflict, the faction of the gods that emerged victorious came to this world. Those gods became responsible for the 7 days of the week, and the periods during which they thrived, they were known as the 7 chief gods. She asked what happened to the gods who lost, and Rhodus explained that the defeated gods were considered evil and banished to the depths of the earth. However, they continued to gather strength and reappeared once a month, lending their powers to monsters. This event occurred on the last day of the month, known as Evil God's Temptation. Chem added that this was why it was dangerous to go outside on that final day. The monsters' powers grew, turning them wicked. Yoshio finally understood why there was a cross marked on the last day of the month. He noticed there were 10 days left until that marked day, just like in the real world, where it was November 20. In the game, it was also the 20th date, with 10 days remaining until the end of the month. He thought about how with the amount of fate points he currently had, he probably wouldn't be able to protect the villagers. It was already midnight and he saw that Rhodus was sitting alone at the table. Layla appeared and asked him what was wrong. He told her that he couldn't stop thinking about Evil God's temptation. He mentioned the same attack from last time and expressed his worry about losing his family. Seeing Rhodus tremble so much, Yoshio wondered what had happened during the last Evil God's temptation. 3 weeks ago, Carol was sleeping in her bed when she suddenly woke up and ran to find her mom and dad. They were working in the kitchen and her mom asked her to wash her face. She went to the well and started washing her face, finding it refreshing. She forgot to bring a towel and suddenly Chem appeared and asked if she had just woken up. Carol agreed and asked where their big brother was. Chem told her he was keeping watch at the village gates. Carol ran away, saying that if Big Brother wasn't there, she didn't care. Chem didn't like that, but when she saw Carol running, she tried to stop her. Carol went back to her home and asked if she had heard Chem's voice. Chem told her she didn't know and then started eating breakfast. After finishing her meal, Carol ran outside. Her mom asked where she was going, and Carol replied that she was going to find her big brother. Her mother tried to stop her, but Carol ran off without listening. As she made her way through the market, she greeted the people around her. Someone asked if Rhodus and Layla were home, and she answered them before running away. Suddenly, she saw a big wall and finally spotted Gams nearby. She ran towards him and hugged him tightly. Gams told her she shouldn't be out there that day. Curious, she asked why, and he explained that it was a special day and pointed out that no other kids were around. She agreed and asked him if he had built the big wall. He shook his head and said that there had been a massive war several decades ago, and this site served as a stronghold. After the war, refugees moved in and prospered in that town, and she wondered if the walls protected them from enemies, and Gams agreed, just as her mom appeared. Her mom told her and asked her to stop running. A soldier approached Gams and asked if he knew them. Gams replied that they were their neighbors and had always been kind to him and his sister. The soldier's subordinate pointed out that the children didn't seem to have the slightest fear. Gams explained that ever since the town was established, it had been a fact that these walls have never been breached. Layla apologized for her daughter's interruption and said she would scold her later, but Gams urged her to be a bit more moderate. After that, they moved on from there. After reaching home, Carol asked if something special was happening that day, like a festival. Layla told her that it would have been nice if it was a festival, but they could have a feast tomorrow instead. Carol was happy to hear that. Then Rhodus and Layla exchanged worried glances. Rhodus, looking out the window, said he had packed everything in the wagon just in case. Layla nodded her head and Rhodus added that it would be great if nothing happened, praying that they could get through the day without any problems. Outside, there were many monsters, much more than usual, and this time, different types had formed a group, all attacking at once. Gams and his subordinates were fighting back, shooting at the monsters with spears and arrows. One of Gam's subordinates ordered everyone to follow Gam's lead, stressing that they must not let the monsters enter the town. But suddenly, a monster leaped over the wall and attacked a soldier. Everyone was shocked, and soon, more monsters began jumping over the wall and into the city. Chaos erupted throughout the village, and inside their home, Rhodus, Layla, and Carol stood together, frightened, hugging each other tightly as the situation spiraled out of control. Suddenly, Gams and his sister appeared at their home, asking if everyone was all right. They confirmed that they were fine, and Gams told them not to worry. Both he and his sister were covered in blood. Him from fighting monsters and Chem from healing injured people. Rhodus asked how the battle was going and Gams admitted it wasn't looking good and seemed hopeless. He explained that the gates had been breached and a swarm of monsters were flooding into town. He thought that it might be best to get his family and his sister to safety. Gams urged them to flee and Rhodus, standing with determination, informed him that the wagon was ready with several boxes of supplies. They all climbed into the wagon while Gams provided protection. As the wagon started moving, some monsters appeared, and Gams quickly told Rhodus to get back on the wagon. He struck down the monsters swiftly and joined them on the wagon as it sped off. Gams informed them that a portion of the town's northwestern wall had collapsed, so they might be able to escape through there. Rhodus was shocked to see the entire town engulfed in flames, with destruction everywhere. Tears streamed down his face as he watched their once beautiful town in ruins. After they escaped from the town, Carol asked her mother if they would be able to return home. With sadness, her mother replied that they probably couldn't, but assured her that new experiences awaited them in other places. Chem smiled and said she was certain they survived thanks to divine protection, adding that the god of fate was guiding them. Later on that day, a courier arrived at Yoshio's house and handed him a small parcel. In the present, Rhodus was working hard on improving his fighting skills, with Gams teaching him. However, sometime Gams told Rhodus that he wasn't suited for battle and advised him to leave the front line fighting to him and Mullis. Sadly, Rhodus admitted that he thought any extra strength would help, but now realized that he didn't know his limits. He apologized to Gams for taking up his time, and Yoshio observed that Gams was quite strict. After dinner, Layla mentioned they were running low on fruit and asked Gams if he could gather some during his patrols and bring them back. Carol excitedly raised her hand, saying she wanted to join and help him too. Rhodus was a bit surprised by her enthusiasm. She explained that she hadn't been able to go outside since they moved to the cave. Rhodus reminded her that he had already told her before that, as the special day approached, monsters grew stronger and it became much more dangerous outside. But Carol smiled and said she would be fine with her big brother and would gather lots of delicious fruit. Hearing that, her father angrily slammed the table and scolded her, telling her to listen to what he was saying. Everyone was taken aback by his reaction, and Carol's eyes were filled with tears. Carol ran from the table, crying and shouting that she hated him before locking herself in a room. Yoshio observed Rhodus's behavior and reflected on his own helplessness. He thought that at best, all he could do was give the villagers hope through prophecy, but he knew that wouldn't solve their problems. With only 214 fate points, he considered using a miracle like summoning a group of hunters. However, it was risky since there was no telling what kind of personalities these hunters might have. The best option, he thought, was to summon a golem, because he would be able to control it, ensuring it wouldn't harm the villagers. But the problem was that he needed 700 points, and that there were only 10 days left. Yoshio briefly considered borrowing money, but he was too ashamed to ask his father or sister. He also wondered if he could sell the tributes he'd received from the villagers, but he knew it wouldn't be easy to sell them and get the money in such a short time. Yoshio was stressing over what to do when the idea of getting a part-time job crossed his mind. It seemed like the simplest solution, but the problem was he had never worked before. He remembered once going to a job interview, but his pride got in the way. He only wanted high-paying jobs with good perks, and in the end, he didn't land any position. His father had even tried using his connections to help him, but Yoshio ended up bringing shame to his family. It had been 10 years since then, and he had never worked a day in his life. Sometimes Yoshio thought about getting a job, but fear held him back. The fear of putting in effort and being rejected, but now, he didn't want to disappoint anyone anymore. As these thoughts weighed in on him, he realized it was time for a change. If he didn't change now, he might never change for the rest of his life. He began to wonder if he could find a job that would pay him at the end of the month, something that could help him gather enough money to support the villagers. However, finding short-term work was challenging in his area, and since he didn't have a driver's license, it made things even harder. He started thinking about the possibilities, but realized the obstacles made it difficult to find any immediate solution. Rhodus was trying to comfort Carol, but she refused to speak to him. Layla came in and gently suggested that he give her some space for a while. Watching their struggle, Yoshio felt the weight of their emotions. Determined to take action, he put on his jacket and decided that he needed a job magazine since he didn't want to rely on the internet. He grabbed his bicycle and rode out to pick up a magazine with job listings. When Yoshio returned home, his mother noticed and was happy to see him taking initiative. She welcomed him warmly and pleased that he had gone out. Yoshio hurried to his room, eager to look through the magazine for job opportunities. As he flipped through the pages, his mother called out that dinner was ready. He was downstairs and joined the family at the table for dinner. Yoshio noticed his sister had returned as well. She seemed surprised, asking if she wasn't supposed to be back, but he smiled and welcomed her warmly. She was a bit confused by his sudden friendliness. As they all sat down to eat, their mother unexpectedly announced that Yoshio was thinking about getting a job. Sayuki smiled awkwardly while their father commented, "So, you finally found some motivation?" Yoshio clarified that it was just a part-time job and he just needed a little cash. But his father responded, "The reason doesn't matter. It's good you're motivated now." Yoshio was surprised by this, as he had expected his father to insist on him only working full-time. Sayuki then teased him, saying he had changed lately and wondered if her big brother had gotten a girlfriend. Their mother laughed, joking that Yoshio didn't seem very popular, which made Yoshio wonder why his mom was answering for him. Yoshio noticed that Sayuki had called him big brother, and it made him happy. His father then asked if his decision to get a job was related to the village, surprising Yoshio with how sharp his father was. Yoshio admitted that it was, explaining that he felt it wasn't right to just keep receiving from the village without giving something back. Sayuki looked confused as she was the only one not following the conversation. Their mother reminded them it was bad manners to talk while eating and told them to finish their meal first. Sayuki agreed and asked her mother to explain everything after they were done. After dinner, Yoshio was sitting in the garden when his father came over and asked if he had found a job yet. Yoshio said he had found 3 possible options and would call them the next day. His father asked if he was looking for short-term work, and Yoshio confirmed, explaining that he had done some important business until the end of the month, so he could only work for a limited time. When his father asked if there were any specific requirements, Yoshio admitted that he wasn't good with customer service, so he was leaning towards jobs that involved physical labor. His father then offered to ask a friend for help, saying that no matter how old Yoshio gets, he would always be his father. There's no shame in getting help from family. Hearing this, Yoshio was reminded of the past when his father had tried to help him, but he had rejected those chances. His father then told him that if he really wanted to achieve something, he should use all the support he could get, even from his family. This advice made Yoshio think of Rhodus, who had tried to help Carol only to have her push him away, just like Yoshio had done once before. After thinking about it, Yoshio agreed with his father's advice. His father immediately called his friend to arrange something for Yoshio. Then he asked Yoshio to change into something more flexible. Yoshio mentioned he had a tracksuit, and his father told him to get ready and be back in 30 minutes. Yoshio was worried because he hadn't written his resume yet, but his father reassured him that it wasn't needed right away, since it was his friend helping out. Yoshio quickly went to his room, shaved, and changed all his clothes, all while worrying that he might disappoint his father again. Before leaving, he checked his computer to see what was happening in the village. He noticed that Rhodus looked frustrated and asked Layla if she needed help with anything. Layla thought about for a moment and said that Carol had already taken care of everything. She explained that ever since they moved to the cave, Carol had been taking the initiative to help out, showing how much she had grown. Rhodus then went to Carol and apologized for getting angry. Carol smiled and told him that everyone knew how much he had cherished her, and that he only got mad because he wanted to protect her. Hearing Carol's words, Rhodus was shocked by how mature and understanding she had become. She went on to say that she wouldn't ask to go outside anymore. Rhodus responded, admitting that he was the one who was wrong. He explained that his fear of the evil god's temptation made him forget that they were in a new land, surrounded by their friends, and that they had chosen to live together. He realized they couldn't keep living in fear and isolating themselves. Yoshio was stunned by Rhodus' change in perspective. Rhodus then proudly declared that Carol was now a valuable member of the village and could make her own choices. He remarked that he trusted her completely. Everyone was happy to hear this, and Yoshio was watching from the outside. He smiled and held his face in relief. He silently thanked the game for giving him the courage to make a difference. Filled with happiness, he left, feeling joy in seeing all of his villagers happy. In the next scene, Yoshio sat in his dad's car as they drove to see his father's friend. Curious, he asked what kind of work it was. His father replied that it was cleaning duty at a supermarket. There was a shortage of staff for the night shift because one of the part-timers had recently quit. Hearing this, Yoshio wondered if this job would be a good fit for him. Finally, they arrived at their destination, and his dad's friend greeted them from afar. He welcomed them warmly and complimented Yoshio, saying that he had a surprisingly fit body for someone who had been staying indoors for so long. Yoshio's dad then said goodbye, hoping that they'd get along well before leaving. Watching his dad walk away, Yoshio felt a bit startled, like a child who didn't want his dad to leave so quickly. Yoshio entered the supermarket, and his dad's friend reassured him not to be so nervous. He explained that all Yoshio needed to do was follow instructions, and if there was anything he didn't understand, he could ask him or two other employees for help. His dad's friend introduced him to his coworkers and playfully asked them not to give him a hard time. The girl greeted him warmly, saying it was nice to meet him, while the boy commented on Yoshio's height, joking that it would make cleaning the fluorescent lamps easier than it was for him. Yoshio noticed how socially confident they both seemed, unlike him. He reminded himself that he was new and needed to set aside his pride and give his best effort. Bowing his head slightly, he said he hoped they could all get along well. After finishing his shift, Yoshio stood beside his dad's friend, the supermarket manager. The manager asked if he could come in at the same time tomorrow, and Yoshio assured him there was no problem. The manager confirmed that it would be another late-night shift and mentioned he'd pick him up at 8 p.m. As Yoshio was getting ready to leave, his co-workers said it was nice meeting him and looked forward to working together again tomorrow. As they left, Yoshio smiled, watching them walk away, feeling a bit more at ease. On his way home, Yoshio reflected on the tasks he'd completed, vacuuming, moving things around, and cleaning tools. He felt satisfied, having calmed his nerves and completed his duties. It had been a long time since he moved his body like that, and it felt good. When he opened the door, he expected everyone to be asleep. He wanted to take a bath right away, but felt thirsty. As he entered the kitchen, he noticed a meal on the table with a note, "Great work. You must be hungry, right? Go ahead and eat up." He smiled, realizing it was from his mom. Grateful, he ate the meal, and after a hard day's work, it tasted even better. After finishing, he headed to the bathroom and saw that the hot water was ready and the tub was clean. He smiled again, knowing his mom had thought of him. As he relaxed in the tub, he silently thanked her, a smile spreading across his face. After his bath, Yoshio checked his computer and saw that all the villagers were asleep. He smiled, thinking that the reason he was able to push through the day was because of them. Watching them work tirelessly had motivated him. Feeling tired, he decided it was time to get some sleep too. When he woke up, he felt soreness in his muscles. He went downstairs and saw his mom, who greeted him warmly and offered to heat up lunch. As they sat at the table, she asked him how work had gone. While eating, Yoshio shared that everyone was nice to him and that he had to work the same shift again tonight. She was happy to see him putting in effort and asked how he liked last night's dinner. Yoshio told her it was delicious and thanked her for taking such good care of him. After finishing his meal and walking away, his mom called out that he had received another parcel. Curious, he opened it and found a ball of dirt inside. He immediately realized it must have come from Carol. The villagers believed they could only send him one tribute per day, but that wasn't true. They could actually send up to 2. However, Carol often sent things whenever she felt like it. Sometimes it was stones she gathered from the riverside, and other times it was shiny dirt balls known as Dorodango. Recently, she started carving blocks of wood and sending them regularly. Yoshio was excited to see what she would eventually create, as the consistent practice seemed to be improving her skills. He was eager to see how her work would develop over time. Yoshio glanced at his computer screen and saw Carol carving something. Suddenly, she exclaimed that she was finished, and he was happy to see how much she was enjoying herself and noticed that she had created something new again. Carol excitedly went to show Mullis what she had made and asked if he could guess what it was. Mullis studied it for a moment before asking if it was the god of fate. Carol beamed and confirmed he was right. Yoshio carefully placed the dirt ball in his locker where he kept all the items Carol had sent him. He knew that to everyone else, these things might seem worthless, but to him and Carol, they were like treasures. He wondered if these handmade items were actually created by employees at the game company or by Carol herself in the game world. Even so, part of him wanted to believe that they were truly sent by Carol, no matter how silly it might seem to others. Feeling drowsy, Yoshio headed to his bed, hoping to get more sleep and ease the soreness in his muscles. As he laid down and closed his eyes, his thoughts drifted. He never imagined his mom would be so happy to see him working, and for the first time, he felt grateful that he could earn money while being useful to others. With a sense of satisfaction, he let himself relax, hoping that a bit more rest would help him recover. After getting some rest, Yoshio got ready and went to work. While he was vacuuming, the manager asked if he was getting the hang of things and reminded him not to worry too much. There was no way to fully adjust in just 2 days. The manager reassured him that his staff were good people, pointing out that the male coworker, who might seem a bit pretentious, was actually a hard worker. Yoshio noticed that despite the guy's personality, he worked quickly and efficiently. The manager smiled and told Yoshio that what mattered most was being diligent, and he praised Yoshio, calling him an excellent worker. Yoshio thanked him. Suddenly, the male coworker, smiling, told the manager to stop joking around with the new guy and get back to work. The girl chimed in, teasing that if the manager was going to slack off, he should increase their wages and cut his own. The manager laughed, saying he was the one who decided the wages, and walked off. Everyone laughed, and Yoshio felt really positive about the atmosphere. He was happy that this was the first place he worked and appreciated how welcoming and fun the environment was. After finishing his night shift, Yoshio waved goodbye to his coworkers as they left. The manager also expressed his appreciation for everyone's hard work. On his way home, Yoshio thought about how there was still another week until the evil god's temptation, and he knew he needed to stay motivated for the sake of the villagers. When he got home, he sat down at his computer with a smile. He realized he hadn't had much time to check the game lately, so he decided to look at the day's conversation log. He saw a conversation between Gams, Carol, and Chem. Gams was feeling a bit tired, and Chem suggested he take a break. Meanwhile, Carol invited him to sleep with her because he needed a nap. Chem pointed out that she was talking to her big brother. Not finding anything particularly interesting there, Yoshio moved on to a conversation between Rhodus and Layla. He learned that Rhodus was studying antidote mixtures from Mullis. He told Layla that he couldn't guarantee the effects yet, but since he couldn't be on the front lines, he wanted to help in any way he could. Seeing this, Layla hugged him from behind and told him that he was a super reliable man. Yoshio felt happy watching them live their lives with such optimism every day. Suddenly, he noticed another conversation log. There were no names mentioned, but the discussion was about ordinary refugees and the risks they faced. They discussed whether or not they needed to take action because otherwise these refugees would perish from the evil god's temptation. They also mentioned that in the past, the humans who had lived there had been wiped out. Then one person said there was only one concern. They were being blessed by the god of fate. The man suggested not making a move and just observing, but they were looking for an opportunity since the refugees had entered their holy land. They were prepared to give them nature's judgment. Reading this conversation, Yoshio was shocked as he realized that Mullis was a spy. He was shocked to discover that Mullis was a spy. This made him realize why he had been treated as a guest instead of an ally. From the conversation, he learned that Mullis came from a tribe that lived in the forest and was angry with the villagers for settling there. However, the villagers were safe for now because Mullis understood that they were blessed by the god of fate. This thought made Yoshio feel a little better as he believed Mullis had helped them just by being there. He checked the time and saw it was getting late, so he decided to give them a prophecy the next day, hinting at the true identity of Mullis. With that in mind, he went to bed and fell asleep. The next day, while they were having breakfast, Yoshio shared a prophecy with them. He apologized for adding more pressure since they were already worried about the evil god's temptation. However, he also warned them indirectly that anyone who posed a danger would face the god of fate's judgment. When he finished, he noticed that Mullis looked a bit startled. Chem asked him if he was okay, and Mullis confirmed that he was. Yoshio realized that Mullis seemed scared of the god of fate. Gams then said that with the god's assistance, they might be able to get through this somehow, and they should still do everything they could. Yoshio then thought he might have managed to stop Mullis from interfering unnecessarily. For now, he looked at his fate points, which were at 350, and hoped he could save enough money from his job to buy more fate points and take a chance on his golem. He felt excited thinking about using the golem alongside Gams. After that, he went to work with the manager. When he arrived, he noticed that Yamamoto, the boy coworker, wasn't there. He asked about him, and the female coworker told him that he wasn't feeling well and would be taking the day off. The manager confirmed this with a smile and said that the three of them would be working together in a smaller store than usual, so it wouldn't take much time. After completing the work, the manager told Yoshio that he was a lifesaver for coming with them. Hearing that made Yoshio really happy. When he reached home, he saw his dad eating dinner and his mom welcomed him. She remarked that if he had come back at this time, they could have waited for him to eat together. He told her that it was fine and explained that they finished their work early today and managed to return quickly. His mom said that he must be hungry and would reheat something for him. He noticed that she seemed to be in a really good mood, so he wondered if he should ask his dad about it. However, he lacked confidence and hesitated. After gathering up his courage to talk to his dad, his mom suddenly announced that the food was ready. He felt a strong energy from her and asked directly, "Mom, what happened?" She smiled, looking ready to share something, but his dad interrupted her, saying that her favorite TV series was about to start. Yoshio noticed that his dad had suddenly cut her off, which left him feeling a bit confused. After finishing dinner, he went to his room and thought about the compliment his boss had given him, which made him feel a bit too enthusiastic. Although he was sleepy, he decided to check on the villagers first. He noticed that Carol had already gone to sleep, and Rhodus and Layla were getting ready for bed after spending some time together, so he decided to give them some privacy. He looked at Mullis, who was lying on his bed deep in thought. Yoshio expected that Mullis might disappear, but then realized it was also difficult for the villagers as they were counting on him. He knew he couldn't force Mullis to leave, so he decided to just watch his actions carefully. Feeling very sleepy, he thought it was best to go to bed as well. Suddenly, he noticed that the kanji for real was surrounded by a square. As Yoshio was about to go to sleep, he suddenly noticed a real dialogue box appear on the screen, just like the one that had shown up in Gam's dream. Curious, he decided to take a quick look before going to bed. When he clicked the button, the screen changed and he saw a modern house displayed. He zoomed in and explored the entrance, hall, bathroom, and kitchen. Then, to his shock, he realized it was his own house from all angles. Confused, he wondered how he could back into the original game screen. Just then, he noticed someone in the bathroom. Zooming in, he saw it was Sayuki. He could even see dialogue boxes where she was talking to herself while washing up. Panic set in. If this was real and his sister found out he was spying on her, she would definitely kill him. Convinced that this must be a dream, he reassured himself, thinking he must have fallen asleep while playing the game. Yoshio then saw his mom and dad sitting in the living room and decided to listen in on their conversation. He figured that since it was just a dream, it wouldn't hurt to eavesdrop. As he started listening, he heard his mom ask his dad why he had stopped her from mentioning the wedding anniversary gift, something he had given her for the first time in 10 years. Yoshio realized that's why his mom had been so happy. He thought it was nice to see his parents getting along, though it still felt a bit awkward for him as their child. Then he heard his dad say he was glad she liked the gift, but for the past 10 years he felt distant. His mom asked if it was because of Yoshio, and his dad agreed. Yoshio was shocked to hear this, even though he knew it was just a dream. The words felt like a stab to his heart. He remembered how much calmer his dad had been before he became a neet. His dad used to always give his best in everything. If Yoshio didn't understand something in school, his dad would patiently explain it in the easiest way possible. And when his mom scolded him and made him cry, his dad would secretly cheer him up with ice cream. Hearing all this now made Yoshio realize how much had changed, and it weighed heavily on him. Reflecting on his past, Yoshio realized he had never truly accepted his own mistakes. Instead, he had buried all these memories deep inside, blaming others and allowing himself to continue being a neet. Tears welled up in his eyes, and then he overheard his mom saying how much brighter Yoshio seemed since he started working. His dad agreed, adding that he had always wanted to apologize for the hurtful things he'd said about Yoshio not trying hard enough or not finding a job. His mom laughed, recalling how Yoshio's dad used to be so laid back and a bit of a partygoer back in his university days. The dad, clearly embarrassed, admitted he had been worse than Yoshio back in those days and had barely passed his classes. He confessed that he had no right to criticize Yoshio, and he felt deeply guilty about it. Seeing his dad in that moment, Yoshio felt awful. He saw the genuine disappointment in his dad's eyes, but he knew it wasn't his father's fault. To Yoshio, his dad was still a great man, someone he had always admired. Yoshio watched his mom and dad having a heartfelt conversation, and tears began streaming down his face. He heard them say that, just like Yoshio, they also needed to change from now on. Wiping his tears, he smiled, thinking that even though it was just a dream, it was nice to see his parents in a way that made them seem more like him. From his perspective, they were already upstanding adults and loving parents. The weight on his heart felt lighter as he realized they too had been carrying worries and burdens beyond what they could handle. Now they all seemed to feel a little lighter. Afterward, Yoshio woke up at his keyboard. He smiled, thinking that even though it was just a dream, it still felt meaningful. Even though the dream seemed to be made for him, he didn't mind. It left him feeling like he could talk to his parents more honestly, like he always should have. He headed to the kitchen and saw his family having breakfast. With a smile, he greeted them with a cheerful good morning as his sister looked at him, a bit confused. On November 30th, Yoshio was running down the street, panting and worried, unsure how he ended up in this situation during the evil god's temptation. 2 days earlier, on November 28th, he had been watching the villagers on his screen as they steadily prepared for the evil god's temptation. They'd rebuilt the fence, fixed any gaps, and even set up a watchtower. Yoshio noticed Mullis standing in the watchtower, spotting a monster nearby and skillfully taking it down with his bow. Mullis' archery skills were impressive, and Rhodus, who was working on the fence, thanked him for his help. Yoshio wondered if Mullis was still planning to stay in the village during the evil god's temptation, or if he would disappear. He realized this was his first time experiencing the event, so it felt like a tutorial for him. He was pleased with how the villagers were carefully testing and strengthening their defenses, but he also felt the pressure. If he failed, even by some rare chance, he could see himself losing his will and slipping back into his old, unmotivated self. Determined not to let that happen, Yoshio knew he couldn't afford to lose the progress he had made in his life. With 540 fate points, he was confident that along with the daily wages from his part-time job, he would soon be able to summon a golem. Having played plenty of games before, Yoshio trusted in his ability to handle whatever challenges came next, no matter how tricky the controls were. Meanwhile, Gams was inspecting the weapons when Carol approached him and asked if they would be okay on the day of the evil god's temptation. He reassured her, saying that they had reinforced the defenses, so even if monsters appeared, they would be fine. Feeling reassured, Carol hugged him. But just then, Chem appeared and angrily reminded Carol that Gams was her big brother. Carol laughed and teased her, saying stepsister was scary. Ignoring the joke, Chem turned serious and asked Gams if they could really survive the upcoming threat with their current preparations. The atmosphere became tense as Rhodus brought up what had recently happened to their previous village, causing everyone to fall silent under the stress of the memory. Breaking the silence, Mullis spoke up, reminding them about the Forbidden Forest and how it was home to many different species of monsters. He also admitted that he usually stayed away during the evil god's temptation because it was extremely dangerous. He apologized to them for not mentioning this earlier. Chem smiled and reassured him, saying that it was okay because Mullis had already given them a lot of help and strength. He had been a great asset to the village. Yoshio, watching the conversation unfold, agreed with Mullis. He thought Mullis was truly a reliable doctor, and even even though he didn't know much about him, he was sure he was a good person. Gams then pointed out that even if they wanted to leave the village, the wagon's wheels were on the verge of breaking, and none of them had the skills to repair it, making it impossible for them to leave. Mullis added that whether he and Gams tried to escape alone or together, it would still be possible, but with everyone else there, it wasn't an option. Hearing this, Gams felt a bit sad but quickly regained his determination. He shouted that they would have to fight to defend their home. This was their only chance to survive, and he promised to put everything he had into making sure they all made it through together. Hearing Gams' determination, everyone smiled, feeling a bit of relief. Yoshio also felt proud of him. Gams then thanked Mullis for everything and said he didn't want him to get involved against his will. They all bowed their hands in gratitude towards Mullis, who looked a bit shocked. Yoshio noticed that everyone seemed to sense that Mullis would eventually leave the village. Mullis told them to raise their heads and explained that he truly wanted to help, but he also had a family and someone waiting for him. He planned to leave that night. He mentioned he would prepare some herbs for them to use whenever they needed. Carol asked if he was really going to leave, and he apologized in response. She then requested him to come back and play with them. Hearing that, he smiled and promised he would return. Yoshio thought about what kind of person Mullis really was. He didn't seem like a bad guy, even though he was watching the villagers. He didn't have any intention of harming them. Yoshio smiled, thinking about this, and then realized it was almost time for him to go to work. He quickly put on his jacket and ran off. Yoshio then went to work, where he operated a massive vacuum that could suck up dirty liquids. Meanwhile, his boss was using a polisher to shine the floor. Misaki was scraping off spilled liquids, and Yamamoto was mopping the floor. After finishing their work, they took a break, and Yoshio had a conversation with Yamamoto. Yoshio tried to give him a polite response, but Yamamoto understood his expressions and said that they were from the same generation, so he could talk casually. They chatted a bit, and Yoshio realized that Yamamoto was quite a gamer. He bought every console game he could find and was a competitive player who visited cyber cafes every week. Yamamoto asked Yoshio if he played games on his smartphone, but Yoshio replied that he didn't have one because as a neet, he always used a computer. Yamamoto agreed, saying that a person really didn't need a mobile phone when they had a PC and could access it any time. After their conversation, Yoshio asked Yamamoto if there had been any interesting games lately. Yamamoto mentioned that there was a game he was seriously addicted to, boasting insane graphics. Curious, Yoshio asked for the name, but Yamamoto couldn't remember it, saying it started with Destruction. Just then, their boss appeared and said it was time for them to go. Yoshio felt frustrated that he couldn't catch the name of the game, but he realized he didn't have enough time to play anything besides Village of Fate. As they were leaving, his boss asked if he was free on the last 2 days of November, as there would be a ton of requests for year-end cleanup next month. Yoshio confirmed he was free, and then they left for home. When he entered his room, he noticed his computer screen displaying the aftermath of Mullis leaving the cave. On the table, several different medicinal concoctions were laid out, accompanied by notes detailing their effects and dosages. Seeing this, he smiled, realizing that Mullis wasn't really a bad guy. He hoped that Mullis would come back after the villagers managed to survive the evil god's temptation. On November 29, Gam stood on the watchtower observing the surroundings while the villagers prayed and worked in their cave. They all looked stressed, so Yoshio decided to write something to ease their worries. He composed the prophecies, summarizing that he understood their anxiety about the day ahead. He promised to lend them a hand if they faced any real danger. He knew this would encourage them to rely on themselves, but he also added a note about needing their understanding when it came to using the golem as an ally. When the villagers read the prophecy, they were happy, feeling a sense of relief knowing that the god of fate was watching over them. This helped them calm down and regain their focus. Seeing them happy lifted Yoshio's spirits too, but he still wanted to test the golem. However, he was unsure how to control it or what conditions would need to be met to activate it. Yoshio thought he had nothing else to do and wasn't feeling sleepy, so he went to the kitchen to make himself some lunch. He grilled some meat and prepared fruit for dessert, then started eating. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was his boss. At first, Yoshio worried he had made a mistake, but his boss reassured him that everything was fine and that he had done a great job. However, they had an impromptu job and needed more help. Since he had nothing else planned besides watching over the villagers, he asked when the job would end. His boss replied that it would be done by 9 in the evening at the latest, so Yoshio thought there wouldn't be any problem and agreed to help. Hearing that, his boss complimented him and mentioned that Yama had suddenly taken the day off, making Yoshio a lifesaver for the team. After hanging up the call, Yoshio wondered why Yama was on leave as he seemed perfectly normal. However, he realized that sometimes he also wanted a day off to play games, so he shouldn't judge Yama for taking a break. He thought that by covering for Yama, he was doing him a huge favor. Feeling happy about it, he finished his meal and thanked himself for it. After that, he went to work, and once they'd done their work, he saw that their boss was having a conversation with a client about not changing the contract once it was made. Occasionally, some people try to negotiate extensions for cleaning services. As Yoshio stood there, he noticed that the time was already 9:15. His boss told him that he could go home since he had some business to take care of, but Yoshio decided to wait until the work was finished. He figured that it would take at most an hour if three of them worked together, so he was fine with that. After they finished work and were heading back, a police officer appeared and informed them that there had been an accident, so the road was closed. Yoshio looked at the time and saw it was already 12:37. He began to worry about the evil god's temptation, wondering if the monsters had invaded and killed the villagers. He asked his boss to stop the car so he could walk home. His boss apologized for the delay, but Yoshio reassured him that it was fine. He started running towards his house, thinking about how bad luck often leads to more bad luck, and hoped that wouldn't happen today. By the time it was 1:23, he was still running and finally reached home, panting heavily. He wondered how many years it had been since he had run like that. Without wasting any time, he dashed to his room and looked at the screen, hoping the villagers would be safe. He immediately checked on Gams, who was sitting on the watchtower with his stick, while the other villagers were sleeping peacefully. There was no sign of a monster attack, and Yoshio breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, his sister appeared at his door, telling him he was being quite noisy in the middle of the night. Covered in sweat, he looked at her and explained that he was in a bit of a rush. As he went to close the door, saying he wouldn't make any more noise, she pointed out that he was covered in sweat and his work uniform was dirty, asking if he didn't want to take a shower. He glanced to the right and said he'd take one soon, but she caught him lying, noting that he always looked to the left when he was telling the truth. She glanced at his computer and asked why he had been leaving it on lately, wondering if there was some special event or something. Surprised, he asked how she knew, and she said that mom had told her and had specifically instructed her not to turn off the PC. Yoshio recalled warning his mother about it, so it made sense that she had told his sister too. Still, he couldn't explain the game to her, as the note had warned him that he might lose the right to play if he did. So he told her that the game was still in the development phase and that he was a beta tester. He explained that if he shared any details, he would get penalized, so he couldn't tell her more. She found it a bit sneaky, but offered to watch over the game for him while he took a shower, saying she didn't want him to catch a cold. He knew it would be a waste of time to argue with her, so he agreed. He told her that he'd be back soon and asked her to keep an eye on the game until then. He explained that there was some kind of outbreak event happening, and though he wasn't sure when it would start, he asked her to make sure not to take her eyes off the screen. He also told her to let him know immediately if the characters were attacked by any monsters. She looked at the screen, confused, but noticed how much he really liked the game. Yoshio headed to the shower, thinking a quick rinse would be enough, but knowing his sister would probably accuse him of not showering properly, he quickly applied soap and showered as fast as he could. After freshening up, Yoshio returned with a smile and thanked his sister for helping out. She teased him, wondering if his shower had been too quick, but he shrugged it off, saying it was fine as long as he got rid of the sweat. He then asked if anything had happened in the game while he was gone, and she told him nothing had changed and wondered why Gams hadn't moved at all. She also commented on how amazing the game's graphics were. Proudly, Yoshio smiled and said they had invested a lot of money into the production. She eyed him suspiciously and asked if he was hiding something because he always turned his back when he felt guilty about something. Surprised that she knew him so well, Yoshio admitted there was something he was keeping secret, but assured her it wasn't anything bad. She asked if it was something he couldn't tell her or their family, and he nodded in agreement. She then stood up from the chair, saying she was going to bed, and shut the door behind her. Yoshio sat there reflecting on how long it had been since they had such a long conversation. It made him so happy to see that their relationship was slowly returning to how it used to be. He sat down and scanned the cave in the game, but there were still no signs of any monsters. He realized he didn't need to rush home after all, but was relieved nothing had happened. Seeing it was already 2 a.m. with 22 hours left until the event, he told himself he needed to give it his all. As he got some snacks, Yoshio thought about how tough it was to pull an all-nighter now, compared to when he was a neet, when it had been a regular thing for him. Morning eventually came and still, no attack. He figured he could take a small break. He went downstairs and greeted his family with a good morning before heading to the fridge. His mom asked if he had woken up early, and he explained that he had some business in the village, so he was online all night. His dad commented on how hard he was working, and Yoshio gave him an embarrassed smile and nodded. After returning to his room, he saw that nothing had changed in the game, but the villagers were now awake. Gams and Rhodus were taking turns on lookout, while the women were praying and cleaning. He felt conflicted. Part of him wanted the monsters to come so he could see how things would play out, but another part hoped the day would pass peacefully. Feeling sleepy, he considered getting some coffee when suddenly something caught his eye. An announcement flashed on the screen, and to his shock, it read that the evil god's temptation had begun. Gams, with his spear in hand, was ready to fight. Yoshio saw that 5 black dogs made up the first wave of the attack, and he remembered they had poisonous fangs. He wondered if the dogs would give up and retreat since he knew it wouldn't be easy for them to get in. But then one of the dogs suddenly backed up, ran forward, and leaped over the fence. Gams stood his ground and quickly pierced it with his spear, killing it instantly. Yoshio felt relieved seeing that. However, the remaining 4 dogs did the same thing, and while Gams managed to kill 2 more, 2 of them made it inside the village. Seeing the situation, even Yoshio started feeling stressed, but Gams quickly ran toward one of the remaining dogs, jumped up, and struck it in the head, killing it instantly. Now it was a one-on-one with the last dog. Gams charged at it, slid underneath, and struck from below with a spear, killing it as well. Yoshio looked at Gams with pride, while Carol and Chem appeared, excited and cheering him on. Gams warned them not to come any closer in case more monsters were around, but Rhodus assured him that he didn't sense any more threats, so it was safe. Noticing everyone had gathered, Gams decided to ask for help from Carol and Chem. He asked them to help toss the monster corpses over the fence, but then Rhodus stepped in, saying that they were getting too excited, and that he and Gams would handle it. Layla winked at Carol and Chem, calling them over to help with something else. Meanwhile, Rhodus and Gams got to work, tossing monster bodies away. Yoshio watched the screen with excitement, thinking that they had handled the first wave so easily that they might not even need the golem to win this battle. Now, 4 hours had passed since the start of the evil god's temptation, and Gams had been successfully fending off the monsters on his own. After defeating the 4th wave, he was finally taking a break, with Chem offering him some water to drink. So far, both boars and black dogs had attacked the village. The fence had proven to be a crucial defense, as the boars could only charge into it, while the black dogs tried to leap over. Each time they did, Gams was ready, striking them mid-air with his spear and taking them down. Yoshio noticed the timing of the attacks and realized they were happening like clockwork, with the monsters randomly attacking every 30 to 60 minutes. Chem could heal the minor injuries Gams sustained after each wave, but Yoshio knew that if the attacks kept coming non-stop, Gam's stamina would eventually run out. He decided that once they survived the day, he'd need to add more fighters to help them out. He saw Layla cooking and thought if he could get some food and drink as well. He then went to the kitchen, and his mother asked if he wasn't going to eat with the family. He explained that he couldn't leave his PC and would be eating in his room. She mentioned she was making his favorite fried chicken, but he apologized and said he couldn't take his eyes off the screen. Grabbing some snacks, he headed back upstairs to his room, thinking he'd try to find time later to bring some fried chicken up with him. When Yoshio returned to his room, he saw 4 black dogs and 3 boars approaching together. Rhodus, who had been keeping watch from the tower, quickly spotted them and warned Gams. Everyone rushed to the cave while Gams stood ready with a spear. The dogs leaped over the fence, but Gams skillfully pierced them midair with a spear. Meanwhile, the boars charged at the fence, eventually breaking through. Yoshio wondered if he should summon the golem now, as there were still 5 hours left until the day ended. Gams managed to kill 1 boar with a spear, and now facing another boar head-on, Gams stood his ground. The boar charged at him, but Gams swiftly pierced its head, taking it down. Yoshio celebrated Gams' victory with excitement. Gams wiped the sweat from his brow and quickly inspected the fence, knowing it needed repairs. Layla urged him to take a break while she and the others rushed to fix the fence. Yoshio was pleased to see their teamwork, and soon enough, the fence was repaired. Suddenly, Yoshio's eyes widened in shock as he noticed nearly 20 monsters approaching. Gams quickly told everyone to hurry back into the cave. At the same moment, a notification popped up on Yoshio's screen. This was the final wave. He smiled, feeling relieved and excited, knowing this would be the last wave of the event. Yoshio recognized some of the monsters from the start of the game, the ones that had attacked the wagons. He looked up their details and found only their name, Green Goblin. He noticed that they carried stakes and seemed more intelligent than the other monsters since they moved and acted like humans. Meanwhile, the boars had broken through the fence and now all the monsters were inside. Gam stood ready with his spear, but suddenly, a charging boar rammed into him, sending him flying through the air. Chem was shocked and almost lost control of herself, but Rhodus held her back to calm her down. Layla also stepped in to stop Chems from running to Gams. Yoshio was shocked too, panicking as he wondered what to do next. In desperation, he activated a miracle and summoned the golem. Suddenly, the screen flashed white and shifted to the golem's perspective. It was now in first-person view, and Yoshio noticed he was inside the cave. Using the controller, he began to control the golem, which held a sword in its right hand. As he approached the villagers, they stared in disbelief, their eyes wide with shock as they realized that the statue was moving. They believed it was the god of fate. Determined, Yoshio made the golem head towards the exit, saying to himself that he would save Gams. Meanwhile, Gams was badly injured but still determined, declaring he wouldn't let the monsters pass, even if it cost him his life. Suddenly, a green goblin charged at Gams and grabbed him, but Gams managed to break free. Just as the golem was about to attack again, Yoshio appeared, slicing the monster with his sword. Relieved, Yoshio smiled and thought to himself that it was now his turn to fight, and that Gams had done an amazing job. Soon after, black dogs rushed towards them, but Yoshio easily cut them down with his sword. He felt proud of how effortlessly he was able to defeat them, and glad that he had saved his fate points for this moment. Having memorized the enemy's attack patterns and movements from earlier battles, it was easier to take them down. Feeling more comfortable with the controls, Yoshio thought it would have been better if he could use his main character too. Just then, he noticed a perspective switch button on the screen. Out of curiosity, he clicked it and switched to a third-person view, where he could see both his golem and his character on screen. He noticed that the figure on the screen looked different from what he had imagined. Then it hit him. It was the wooden statue that Gams and Chem had carved, representing the god of fate. After defeating all the monsters, a notification appeared. Evil God's temptation end. Yoshio felt a surge of happiness, relieved that he had finally saved the villagers. The villagers looked at him with excitement and gratitude, thanking him for protecting them. Yoshio felt proud, but then he realized he couldn't move the golem anymore. A message popped up explaining that the golem consumed fate points every second and would become immobile once the points ran out. Another note mentioned that the golem could only be activated once per day. Shocked, Yoshio couldn't believe how expensive it was, thinking it could burn through thousands of yen in such a short time. Disappointed, he compared it to a pay-to-win smartphone game, but seeing the happiness on the villagers' faces made him feel better. He proudly thought to himself that he had managed to protect them and tried to stay positive. He then wrote a prophecy for the villagers, informing them that there wouldn't be any more attacks and they had done really well. They were overjoyed to hear this, and they carefully picked up the statue, placing it back on the altar. They began praying and thanking him for his help. Yoshio looked around the area just to make sure it was safe and noticed the dead bodies that needed to be cleaned up. Just like in real life, they wouldn't disappear on their own like other games. He saw an arrow stuck in one of the boar's corpses and realized that Mullis had also been helping them. The next day at work, Yama apologized to Yoshio for his absence last month, thanking him for covering. Yoshio replied that he also had some business at the end of the month, so if Yama had been absent then, it wouldn't have been possible to help. But since it happened the day before, everything worked out fine. Grateful, Yama treated Yoshio to a drink. Yoshio asked for some hot milk tea, and after getting it, he casually asked why Yama had been away. Yama asked him not to tell the boss, and knowing that Yoshio was a gamer, admitted it was for a limited-time game event. Yoshio laughed, surprised as he had expected something like a date. Yama joked that he was worried that Yoshio might be upset, but then explained that the game he mentioned earlier was super addictive and that the event took place at the end of the month. Yoshio wondered if it might be Village of Fate, so he asked if the game involved role-playing or building. Yama shook his head and said he wasn't into those kinds of games, as he was more into pure PvP games. Yoshio smiled, realizing from what Yama was saying that it had nothing to do with the Village of Fate. He told Yama that he had tried those kinds of games in the past but wasn't really good at them. Hearing this, Yama looked disappointed and said he would have suggested some game titles, but guessed it was pointless now. Yoshio thought it was nice to chat about games during the break, and after that, he headed back home. Yoshio looked at the computer and saw that the villagers had cleaned up the monster corpses and were now busy repairing the fence. Curious, he checked the conversation logs. Rhodus was suggesting to Gams that he should take a break, but Gams insisted he couldn't rest since he was in charge of the hard labor, assuring everyone he would be fine. Chem and Carol also urged him not to overwork himself, but Gams repeated that he was all right. Then Layla stepped in, telling them not to get in Gams' way and asked for their help instead. Yoshio smiled, appreciating how hardworking and dedicated the villagers were. Yoshio glanced at his fate points and noticed that they had increased slightly, likely thanks to the villagers' gratitude. He saw Rhodus and Gams dragging a monster corpse and thought they might offer it as tribute, meaning he could expect some meat tomorrow. Realizing he needed to clear space in the fridge, he headed to the kitchen. While he was there, Sayuki suddenly appeared with a smile, announcing she was home. As he prepared a meal for himself, he asked if she'd like some too, and she agreed. After serving her, Sayuki happily complimented the food, saying it looked delicious and thanked him. She then asked for a kiss to show her appreciation. Yoshio noticed she smelled like alcohol and wondered if she might be drunk. She started eating the food like a child, and Yoshio noticed that she was late again, so he asked if she was okay. She didn't say much, but she looked a bit stressed. Sensing something was wrong, Yoshio gently asked if there was anything she wanted to share. He admitted he might not be the best brother, but talking about it might help her feel better. After a moment, she confessed that she had been feeling like someone was watching or following her lately. She mentioned that she recently had a feeling at a nearby convenience store but wasn't sure if it was real or just her imagination. Yoshio immediately wondered if it could be the same stalker from the past. He told her about the previous incident and said he had been worried since she'd been coming home late recently. She seemed surprised and asked if he was really concerned. Yoshio confirmed it, saying he was her older brother no matter what. She admitted that she thought he hated her, and he shared that he assumed it was natural for her to dislike him. But then with a smile, she said her big brother was becoming more like his old self, more decent and cooler now. Yoshio wondered if she said that because she was happy, and he told her to call him if she was ever late so he could pick her up. She asked if he got his phone from their mom, and he agreed, but added that he might not always be available if he was busy cleaning at night. She warned him not to be reckless like before, and he agreed, knowing that she was still scared. He thought to himself that this time, he had to do something to protect her. The next day, after finishing his shift, Yoshio was on his way home. He told his boss he needed to stop by the convenience store, so his boss dropped him off there. As Yoshio looked around the store, he couldn't help but think about Sayuki's stalker and wondered if they might be nearby. While grabbing some groceries, his mind wandered to the time when he was hospitalized. Fortunately, there had been no lasting damage to his body, but Sayuki had cried nonstop during that time. Both he and Sayuki received apology letters afterward, but they were filled with empty, cliché statements that lacked any real meaning. After buying the groceries, Yoshio headed home. On his way, he noticed someone struggling to pick something up. He walked over to help and saw that it was Seika, his childhood friend. He offered to pick it up for her, and after thanking him, she mentioned that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. Seika was Yoshio's childhood friend and had lived next door. They'd been close since birth, growing up together and attending the same schools all the way through university. After graduation, she landed her dream job at a company while he became a neet. In the first few years, Seika would visit and send him emails, but Yoshio, feeling too ashamed of his situation, never responded. This was the first time they'd seen each other in 10 years. Yoshio noticed her leg and asked if she was all right. Seika nodded, explaining that she hadn't been paying attention while taking the stairs and missed a step. He told her to be more careful and then asked if she remembered when they were kids how she once hurt herself by climbing a tree and falling from it. A bit embarrassed, she told him not to bring up those memories. Seika looked at his outfit and he mentioned that he was working part-time at a cleaning company. Feeling a bit ashamed about his situation, he hesitated, but she reassured him that it wasn't a big deal and that she would always support him. Her words made him happy and he thanked her for her kindness. Noticing the cold weather, he apologized for keeping her outside and suggested she go home to warm up. She smiled, saying she was glad they could catch up after so long. Then she headed into her house. Yoshio started walking home, feeling happy about how smoothly their conversation had gone, especially since it was their first in 10 years. He realized Seika hadn't changed much, but then his expression shifted. He thought it couldn't be possible. She must be talking to him on his level out of kindness. She had been out in the world for a decade, becoming a mature adult, experiencing both good and bad things, while he had only recently started working. The gap between them seemed impossible to bridge, and the thought made him sad. Suddenly, Seika came back and called out to him, leaving Yoshio shocked. She told him that a new sweets cafe had opened in front of the station and that all the customers were young people, making it hard for her to go alone. She asked if they could go together once her leg healed. Yoshio was stunned and awkwardly replied that he liked sweets too. She smiled, happy to hear that, and said she would send him an email later, looking forward to it. Blushing, she quickly returned to her house, leaving Yoshio standing there in shock, wondering if this was a date. When Yoshio reached home, he wondered why he felt so excited. He was confused about his emotions, especially since there was still the issue with Sayuki's stalker. He questioned what use there was in being so happy. As he walked in, his mother was in the kitchen, welcoming him with a bright smile and telling him that dinner was ready. He smiled back at her, though it felt a bit strange. She noticed something odd about his smile and wondered what was wrong. A few days later, he had the whole day off. He sat in front of his computer, thinking he could play games as much as he wanted. Yoshio thought about how there hadn't been any signs of Sayuki's stalker lately. He wondered if she had just imagined it like she had mentioned before. He also realized that next Sunday he had a date with Seika, and he needed to plan for the next evil god's temptation in the game. He thought about how he could only use the golem as a last resort because it had too many limitations. It also worried him that Gams was still the village's only military strength, so he started considering which miracle would be the most helpful. Suddenly, Yoshio noticed Mullis returning to the village. He thought it would be perfect if Mullis could join them as one of the villagers. Everyone greeted him warmly, and Carol ran over to welcome him back with a hug. Mullis apologized for fleeing on his own, calling it shameful, but Layla reassured him, saying they were all grateful to him and had no complaints. Chem added that it must have been a sign from the god of fate. Yoshio admired how kind and forgiving the villagers were. There wasn't a single one he could dislike. Gams thanked Mullis for helping them from behind the scenes, and Mullis humbly replied that it was all he could do to contribute. He apologized again, and bowing his head, he said he had something to ask of them. The villagers were confused, but Gams said that Mullis' kindness deserved to be repaid and asked what he needed. Mullis then revealed his true identity, admitting that he wasn't a doctor, but someone from a different race who lived in the Forbidden Forest. Mullis then confessed that he had been watching over them since they entered the forest. Yoshio noticed his ears and wondered if Mullis was an elf. Chem, speaking sharply for the first time, asked if this meant he already knew how dangerous the evil god's temptation was in the forest. Yoshio was surprised by her sudden change in tone. Mullis apologized again, admitting that he had some idea, and explained that this recent attack felt more organized than usual, with strange behavior from the monsters. Gams agreed, saying that during the last two attacks, he also noticed that the monsters were unusually ferocious during the evil god's temptation, but they had never coordinated like that before. Rhodus confirmed this, saying he had never heard of such an organized attack on a village before. Gams, however, set that aside and asked Mullis what he wanted from them. Mullis then revealed that his own village had been destroyed by the evil god's temptation. Hearing this, everyone was shocked, and Yoshio was equally shocked. He found it surprising, given that Mullis' race had been living in the forest for generations and must have had preparations for monster raids, yet they were still wiped out. Mullis explained that the attack was much larger than anything they had seen, with various types of monsters attacking together. He suspected that the attack was organized and led by someone based on what a surviving villager had told him before they died. Gams asked if there were any survivors from Mullis' village and whether he could bring them to safety, but Mullis sadly replied that no one had survived. He added that the bodies of about 10 children were missing, which led him to believe that they may have been taken to a monster's nest. Yoshio felt deeply saddened by this, imagining how painful and heartbreaking it must have been for Mullis. Mullis mentioned that there might still be a chance the children were still alive, but he felt that worrying about them could be a waste of time. Suddenly, Gam stood up and said, "Let's go." Both Chem and Mullis were shocked by his determination. Chem quickly grabbed some weapons from the inside and said she would join him. Rhodus suggested they prepare some food and water for the journey, so he asked Layla to handle it. Mullis thanked them, feeling grateful for their willingness to help. Yoshio felt proud of them too. As he sat there, he felt a bit sad. Everyone was doing something to help, and he wished he could contribute more. He thought about the fact that he could only trigger a prophecy once a day, so he decided to save it for when it was really needed. He considered other options, but realized that activating the golem would use up his points before it even reached its destination. Feeling a bit helpless, Yoshio concluded that for now, All he could do was watch over them. Gams told everyone it was fine if only he went with Mullis for the rescue and asked the others to stay inside the cave, but Chem insisted on going too, saying that if they found any injured children, she could heal them. Gams pointed out that it would be dangerous, but Chem replied that she understood the risks and reminded him that they also had the protection of the god of fate. Yoshio liked the idea, thinking he could guide them through prophecies and leave the rest to Gams. Knowing he couldn't change her mind, Gams agreed. Then Carol handed him a small statue of the god of fate that she had carved herself. Chem reassured everyone that they would be back soon and told them to take care. Layla and Rhodus told them not to worry and to return immediately if they encountered any danger. Carol cheerfully added that she would make a delicious meal and wait for them. With that, Gams, Chem, and Mullis set off towards their destination. Yoshio noticed that Mullis had figured out the location of the monster's nest, so it wouldn't take long to get there. Still, he felt frustrated that all he could do is watch. They stopped by a river to rest, where they sat down and drank some water. Yoshio noticed Chem looked really tired. It had been an hour since they left the village. Mullis mentioned he wasn't sure how many monsters were left since many had died along with the villagers, so he hoped there wouldn't be too many remaining. Gams added that he suspected the surviving monsters were unharmed. Mullis explained that there were 3 types of monsters, and it was likely a green goblin who had kidnapped the children, as they tend to bring their prey back alive. Yoshio worried about the kidnapped children, wondering if they would be alright. He thought about how realistic the game was becoming and feared the possibility of witnessing something cruel. After resting for a bit, Mullis said it was time to move on. As they walked, he suddenly noticed something and warned the group. They quickly hid behind some bushes and spotted several green goblins in the area. Yoshio counted 9 of them, and he thought it would be too dangerous for Mullis and Gams to fight that many at once. Mullis commented that if the sky weren't so clear, it would be easier for them to sneak around. Hearing this, Yoshio wondered if he could make it rain. He suddenly remembered the weather control option in the game. When he clicked on it, a list of weather options appeared. As he scrolled through, he noticed torrential rain and thought about how it might affect the situation. After selecting torrential rain, a radius circle appeared on the screen, showing the area where Yoshio could make it rain. The larger the circle, the more faith points it would consume, so he adjusted the size to cover just the area where the goblins were. Once he confirmed it, rain suddenly started pouring down. The trio looked up at the sky in confusion, and the green goblins quickly ran back to their tents to escape the downpour. Chem noticed a faint sparkle from the Bible she carried and remarked that it must be a sign from the god of fate. Gams instructed Chem to hold onto his gear and told her to move as lightly as possible. She held his weapon and waited behind the bushes, while Gams and Mullis went ahead, silently sneaking into the tents to stealthily kill the goblins inside. After a while, they had taken down all the goblins without being detected, but they still couldn't find the children. Yoshio watched as they moved unnoticed. There was only one place left to search. Gams pointed towards it and said he could go in first. As he ran towards the cave, a massive monster suddenly appeared, a red cyclops. They were all stunned by its size. The cyclops attacked Gams, who barely dodged it with his sword. Mullis shot an arrow at the monster, but it easily deflected it. Yoshio was shocked at how tough the monster's skin was, wondering if they could even defeat it. He checked the monster's background information and saw it belonged to the ogre family, known for their incredible strength and love of eating human flesh. The Cyclops tried to strike Gams, but he managed to dodge the attack and quickly countered, only for the Cyclops to block it with his weapon. They kept exchanging blows, and while this was happening, Mullis kept trying to shoot arrows at the Cyclops, but the arrows shattered as soon as they hit its tough skin. Yoshio was shocked, realizing that this was the most powerful monster he'd encountered so far. He knew that if Gams got hit directly, he would be in serious danger, possibly unable to defend himself. Mullis, realizing that regular arrows wouldn't work, said he had no choice but to use his family's secret poison. He revealed a powerful poison that had been passed down for generations, saying no one had ever survived it. The problem, though, was that he wasn't strong enough to pierce the Cyclops' tough skin. Yoshio knew they were running out of options. He considered using a prophecy to tell them to escape, but he doubted they could flee from the red Cyclops without getting hurt. He thought about letting Gams fight while the others escaped, but the plan felt risky. Yoshio stressed over how to turn the situation around. Then, an idea came to him. He quickly wrote out his strategy in a prophecy for them and activated the thunderstorm miracle, shrinking its area as much as possible. Just as the Cyclops was about to attack Gams, Yoshio triggered the storm, and a bolt of lightning struck the monster. While the strike wasn't enough to kill it, it weakened the Cyclops. At that moment, Mullis charged his arrow, tying both the poison and the small God of Fate statue to it. He aimed for the Cyclops' mouth, but just before the arrow could hit, the monster blocked it with his weapon. Acting fast, Yoshio activated the Summon Golem miracle and used the golem to force the poison into the Cyclops' mouth. The monster clutched its neck, realizing something was terribly wrong. Yoshio had given them the prophecy for the plan, and once it was set, it was up to him to make sure that the poison reached the Cyclops' mouth. They successfully executed the plan, and after just a few seconds, the monster felt the effects of the poison, collapsing to the ground and dying instantly. Yoshio celebrated their victory, feeling proud that they had all worked together. With the Cyclops defeated, it was time to rescue the children. Gam said he would go in first to check for any more enemies. After a while, he came back with a sad expression and asked Mullis to go in and confirm what he saw. Chem wanted to go as well, but Gams, acting as her protective older brother, told her to stay behind because he didn't want her to see it. When Mullis returned, he couldn't hold back his emotions and collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed with grief. He thanked Gams and Chem for helping him. Gams told him to keep his head up, as they were all deeply saddened by what they had found. Yoshio, watching from his side, had tears in his eyes. Chem asked Mullis if she could pray for the children so their souls could rest in peace, and he agreed. Yoshio watched as they buried the children, thinking how most games would skip scenes like this, but this one showed the full reality of life and death. After making graves for the children and praying for them, Chem asked Mullis if he would return with them to their village. Gam supported the idea, saying everyone there was worried about him. Mullis agreed, and they all prepared to head back together. After they returned to the cave, Carol welcomed them back warmly. Mullis hugged Carol, and Layla comforted Chem, who was quietly crying. Rhodus praised everyone for their hard work and said he would prepare meals for them. Layla told Mullis that he could stay with him for as long as he needed. Yoshio, watching all of this, was in tears, thinking about how hard they all tried. He wondered what Mullis would do next. Yoshio hoped he would become their comrade, but he knew he wouldn't force them to stay. No matter what Mullis decided, Yoshio wished for his wounds to heal quickly. In the next scene, Mullis was standing on top of a cliff and suddenly jumped off. Yoshio jolted awake, realizing it had all been a nightmare. Filled with worry, he rushed to his PC to check on Mullis. When the screen loaded, he saw Mullis sitting silently at a table. Remembering how Mullis had been tormenting himself the night before, Yoshio feared the worst. During breakfast, Carol mentioned that she hadn't seen Mullis leave his room and wondered if he wasn't hungry. Rhodus reassured her, saying it was fine and that Mullis just needed more time to heal. Yoshio, thinking about ways to cheer up the villagers, noticed a new option called Egg Gacha. According to its description, it could be used for free once a month and would randomly hatch into a reptile, monster, or even a rare creature. After hatching it, it would become loyal to the first person it saw. Yoshio thought if it turned out to be a bird, they could secure a regular supply of eggs. If it was a reptile, they could grill it or keep it as a pet, and if it was a monster, they could raise it to help in combat. Since it was free, he decided to go ahead and press the button. The screen moved and it landed on a simple egg. However, there was no indication of what kind of egg it was. A note appeared saying it would be placed near the village. Yoshio was surprised to see that the egg wasn't given directly to the villagers, but was left somewhere near the village. He eventually found it and wondered how to inform the villagers, so he wrote a prophecy about it. A few minutes later, Carol excitedly appeared, showing everyone the egg. She was eager to cook it in an egg dish, but Layla quickly stopped her, saying they must not eat it since it was a gift from God. Carol agreed and placed the egg in front of the God of Fate statue to give him thanks. However, Carol hadn't realized that this was the spot where they offered tributes to their god. As a result, the egg suddenly disappeared. Layla, shocked, ran to the statue and apologized, realizing they had accidentally given the egg as an offering to God. Yoshio was shocked, wondering if the egg would be delivered to him the next day. He thought it could be dangerous to eat it if it wasn't a chicken egg, and he began to worry about what kind of egg it might be. He searched online for similar eggs and found that it resembled reptile eggs. He also considered the possibility that it might be a monster egg, which seemed absurd to him. He hoped that it was something like a lizard or a snake, which could be safely raised as a pet. But then he worried about how his family would react. The next day, when the parcel arrived, his mother informed him about it. She asked if it was meat or fruit again, but when he opened the package, she saw the egg and immediately noticed it wasn't from a chicken. He explained it might be a reptile egg, and she joked that maybe he was trying to raise a reptile to impress Sayuki. Confused, Yoshio was surprised when his mother revealed that both she and his father used to love reptiles, and she had raised many lizards in her room. Yoshio, who had never been to her room, was shocked to learn this new information about his mother. Yoshio realized that he should put in effort to improve his relationship with his family. He decided he would ask his mother for advice on raising the egg once she returned home. During dinner, his mother brought up the topic and mentioned that Yoshio wanted some advice from both his father and sister. His father asked what it was about, and Yoshio explained that he had been sent a reptilian egg from the village. They asked if he wanted to raise it, and Yoshio agreed, knowing that both Sayuki and his father liked reptiles. Sayuki agreed to help, although she admitted she wasn't an expert but could still teach him a few things. The dad also offered support, telling Yoshio that he had a set of equipment for raising reptiles stored away and that Yoshio could ask him anything. Yoshio felt happy and surprised by how cooperative and supportive his family was, thanking them for their help and feeling closer to them than he had expected. He then brought his family to his room to show them the egg. They examined it and guessed it might be from a gecko or a crocodile. Sayuki even wondered if keeping mini crocodiles was legal. As they discussed it, most of what they were saying went over Yoshio's head. His father asked Sayuki to set up a feeder and water bowl for the egg. Together, they created a small habitat for it, and they were happy with how it looked. His dad told him that they wouldn't know for sure what it was until it hatched, and he reminded Yoshio to take pictures when it did. Yoshio thanked them, feeling relieved to have two reptile lovers in his family. He also realized that by coincidence, his bond with his family was growing stronger every day thanks to the Village of Fate. This made him start to believe more in the existence of the real god of fate. A few days later, Yoshio dressed up differently than usual, which caught his mother's attention. She asked if he was going on a date, and when he hesitated to answer, she teasingly asked who the girl was. Yoshio brushed it off, saying it didn't matter, and told her that he would be back later. He then went to meet Seika and waited for a while. When she arrived, she apologized for keeping him waiting. He asked how her leg was, and she confirmed that it was fine now. They went inside the cafe together, and Yoshio noticed it was the kind of place that wasn't really meant for someone to visit alone. After their order arrived, she tried the food with excitement and told him it was so delicious she could eat it non-stop. Seeing her so happy made Yoshio smile, and he thought she didn't look any different from when she was 20. As they chatted, she mentioned that she used to eat his mother's cooking often, and then asked him what he had been up to. She revealed that Yoshio's mother had told her about how he was helping with the revitalization of a village online, and how interacting with the villagers had brought back his cheerful self. Yoshio was surprised that his mother had talked about him that much, but he confirmed it was true. She then asked him what kind of village it was. Yoshio hesitated. He didn't want to tell her the full truth about the Village of Fate because he feared losing the ability to play the game. At the same time, he didn't want her to think less of him for spending money on microtransactions. After a moment of silence, she asked him again. Finally, he smiled and said that it was a small village with only a few villagers, but they were all very kind and close to each other. He explained that each villager had their own role and worked really hard, even in harsh conditions. Seeing them live like that made him want to change for the better too. He opened up about why he had started his new job and shared some of the details about the village. With a cute smile, she asked if he really liked those villagers, and he agreed, telling her about Gams and the playful fights between Chem and Carol. She seemed even happier to see him talking so freely. As they were walking back home, she thanked Yoshio for coming along, and he expressed his gratitude for the treat. When he offered to pay, she refused, reminding him that she had invited him so she would cover it. Yoshio smiled and promised that next time, he would definitely pay for everything. She then asked if he would go out with her again, and he agreed, saying he would as long as she was okay with it. She smiled and said they'd hang out again sometime, and with that, they both headed home. When Yoshio got back, he went to his room and suddenly thought there might be an insect around. Grabbing a rolled-up poster to deal with it, he looked around but couldn't find anything. Just then, he heard a cracking sound. He turned to the egg and realized it was hatching already. Surprised that it was happening so soon, he watched anxiously as the egg started breaking right in front of his eyes. Stress built up as he wondered what was going to come out. Yoshio was stressing out as he searched frantically for Sayuki's notes but couldn't find them. Suddenly, a lizard hatched from the egg. He breathed a sigh of relief, glad it wasn't some strange monster. Looking at the tiny creature, he smiled, thinking how cute it was and how he could raise it with care. He quickly took a picture and sent it to Sayuki and his dad, and then searched the internet to identify the species. He found similar lizards, but none were golden like this one. He wondered if the lizard was this color because it had just hatched. As he admired it, the lizard looked back at him, both of them staring at each other. Suddenly, Yoshio heard his mom calling that dinner was ready. He went to the table and Sayuki, looking a bit down, asked if he wasn't checking his phone. Surprised, he apologized, explaining that he hadn't looked at it. She told him that she'd sent a picture of a lizard and asked if she could see it when she got home. He reassured her to relax and said he'd bring it to her. When he went back to his room, he saw the lizard on the floor and wondered how it had escaped its case. He picked it up and took it to show them. Just then, their mom reminded them that it was time to eat, and their dad, though about to lose patience, calmly said they should eat first and then spend time with the lizard afterward. After dinner, they returned to his room and were amazed to see the lizard's golden color. Sayuki took a picture and mentioned that there are golden 5-lined skinks and grass lizards in Japan, but this one was closer to actual gold. Yoshio asked their dad, who was looking at his phone, and suggested it looked like an armadillo lizard, but wondered if the golden color was a mutation. Sayuki asked if the villagers had told Yoshio anything about what the lizard eats. He explained that it had been eating fruit from the village. His dad asked if he had tried asking the villagers about the species, but Yoshio, thinking quickly, said the village was in Hokkaido and avoided explaining how they got their ideas. Sayuki assured him that they understood, but he asked them to keep it a secret and not to show the photos to anyone. He mentioned that the lizard could eat fruit for now, but they should research what it would eat later on. After discussing this, they all returned to their rooms. Yoshio realized that his family had never entered his room, even with the door unlocked. However, he thought they would probably come to check on the lizard more often now. To keep his privacy, he decided it would be safer to turn off his monitor when he wasn't in the room. As he began looking at the village, he noticed that Carol was already asleep. Layla and Rhodus were having a stressed conversation about Mullis. Meanwhile, Chem was asking Gams if she could pray once more for the children of Mullis village. Gams replied that they would go together to pray once Mullis felt better. He then looked into Mullis' room and saw him quietly reading a book that looked similar to the Bible that Chem used. As Mullis stared at the book, he wondered why his god didn't help him like the god of fate did. Yoshio realized that it was similar to Chem's Bible, a whole tome filled with the teachings of gods that Mullis and his people believed in. Since the Bible was for them to read, Mullis felt that when they didn't receive blessings, he had complaints against the gods. Suddenly, Yoshio realized that when he was at work, if his villagers were attacked and he couldn't help them at all, it might weaken their faith. He wondered if he should become a neet again, but he didn't want to go back to that old life. Instead, he wished for a more convenient system to help. Just then, he noticed the option for a connection system and realized it was available on his mobile as well. He quickly downloaded it and opened the app. He was amazed to see that he could manage miracles and prophecies easily from there. This gave him a relief because he could check on the villagers during breaks at work. The next day, when Yoshio came home from work, he looked at the case and saw that the lizard was eating. He noticed that Dad and Sayuki weren't home yet, so he wondered if his mother had fed it. He then went to his PC to check on the village and noticed that everyone was enjoying themselves together. Mullis appeared and apologized to everyone for causing trouble. He asked if they would allow him to stay in the village as well. He mentioned that he had thought about leaving the forest, hoping that some of his comrades were still alive, but he didn't know what the world was like beyond the forest. Therefore, the village was the only place he felt he could live. He bowed his head and made his request. Gams was happy to hear this and said they had no reason to refuse him. Everyone cheered and welcomed Mullis warmly. Yoshio felt delighted to see this and remarked that his villagers were the best. He saw a notification that Mullis had moved to the village and now he could access his background information as well. He saw that Mullis was 151 years old and realized that rather than being male, she was female. He wondered how she still looked like she was in her 20s and if that was just how elves were. Mullis then shook hands with Gams, and he thought that she hadn't revealed her gender to everyone yet, which was good. This way, Chem might feel less insecure about Mullis joining her on hunting trips. Yoshio felt happy to have an extra villager and hoped they would all get along well from now on. Suddenly, he received a call from Sayuki. He asked what was wrong and she told him to come quickly because she felt like someone was watching her when she got off the bus. So she rushed into a convenience store. She sounded scared, so he told her to calm down and that he was on his way. He instructed her not to leave the store. Yoshio quickly headed towards her and his lizard watched him as he dashed from his room. He pedaled his bicycle as fast as he could towards the store. Yoshio pedaled his cycle faster, scanning the area to see if he could spot the stalker. But first, he focused on reaching Sayuki. He rushed to the convenience store and immediately asked if she was okay. She said she was, but he could see that she was still shaking. He told her to stay put while he went to deal with the stalker. Sayuki stopped him and gave a description of the person she saw. 10 minutes later, Yoshio returned, saying he had searched the area but couldn't find anyone matching her description. She apologized, saying she might have made a mistake. She wondered what was wrong with her, but Yoshio reassured her that nothing was wrong. He guessed it might be because of the scary experience she had gone through recently. The next day, while Yoshio was coming back from work, Sayuki messaged him, letting him know that their dad would pick her up. He felt relieved hearing that, and from that day onward, either he or their dad made sure to meet Sayuki at the bus stop. On his way home, Yoshio thought about playing Village of Fate on his phone. He opened the game, and inside, Mullis asked if everyone would like to visit her village the next day. Yoshio wondered why she would invite them to her ruined village, but Mullis explained that even though the village had been burned down, there were still some useful supplies and food left. She thought they could make good use of them, and the spirits of the villagers would be happy if their belongings were put to use. Gams asked if she really was okay with this, and Mullis confirmed it, saying they'd avenged her people, so it was the right thing to do. Yoshio found her reasoning acceptable, and Carol, excited, said she wanted to go too. Rhodus and Layla were puzzled, but Carol explained that she was always stuck at home watching over the house. She pointed at Chem and said it wasn't fair that only Chem got to go, even though she wasn't very useful. Gams reassured her it was fine, and they would take Carol along too. Chem, however, objected, saying it was too dangerous. Gams explained that they had defeated the enemies, so it should be safer now. Finally, Chem asked Carol to promise that she would listen to Gams without question, to which Carol agreed. Chem was still kind of objecting, so Gams reassured her by saying Rhodus and Layla would come along as well. He explained that everyone needed a change of pace, otherwise they'd get too stressed and depressed. A breath of fresh air would be good for all of them. Yoshio was pleased to see Gams stepping up as a guardian for the villagers. Mullis suggested they travel by horse and use a wagon to bring the goods back. Everyone, including Yoshio, was happy with this plan. Yoshio thought it made the trip even more worthwhile now that they had a wagon to transport everything. Yama noticed Yoshio playing a game and asked if it was a new one. Yoshio confirmed, but he saw that Yama looked upset, so he asked if something had happened that day. Yama reminded him about the game that he had been addicted to, and Yoshio remembered, asking if it was the unique strategy game where they steal enemy territories. Yama confirmed and said that one of his bases had been taken over by the enemy. He explained that he had spent a lot of money to strengthen his forces, but it all ended up being wasted. Yama added that he still had some bases left, but losing half of his salary to the game was painful. Yoshio sympathized with him and admitted that he also spent several thousands on microtransactions in the game that he was playing, so he understood how it felt. When Yoshio got home, he checked on his village in the game. The villagers were getting ready to set off on their horses. He noticed that there was a river near the cave, but they were taking a longer route to avoid crossing it. Yoshio thought it would be best to keep watching the map closely, staying alert to their surroundings. Since Mullis was now a villager, he could see all the places she had traveled, but he still didn't have a full view of the entire Forbidden Forest. He wondered just how big the map was. As they rode, Carol joked with Gams, saying he looked like a knight escorting a princess. Gams smiled and called her princess, asking how her ride was. Carol happily replied that it was incredibly comfortable, but Chem felt a little jealous after hearing that. They were almost at the village when Yoshio noticed some people already there. They didn't seem hostile, but he couldn't see any of their background information, nor could he hear what they were saying. He realized he couldn't understand them unless the Bible was nearby. This made him think that the progress in the game depended on the Bible, as he couldn't activate miracles or prophecies without it being close. He considered warning the villagers but decided to hold off in case something worse happened and he needed to save that prophecy. When the villagers arrived at the village, they saw that it was in terrible condition. Suddenly, Gams told everyone to stay behind one of the houses, informing them that there were people up ahead. Mullis and Gams rushed forward, with Mullis readying her bow, wondering why these villagers were in her village. Suddenly, Mullis recognized the man and asked if he was Doldol. The man smiled out and recognized Mullis, asking if she was all right. He told his guards to sheath their weapons and expressed concern about the village's condition, saying he was relieved to see Mullis safe. He introduced himself as a peddler and offered to buy anything they had, understanding that they must have gone through difficult times. Rhodus spoke with the man and suggested that once they were done, they should head to the cave, where he could sell some goods to him. Yoshio felt happy seeing this, remembering that he had activated the Peddler Visits miracle 3 days ago. It hadn't happened right away, so now he understood that some miracles take time to take effect. After the wagon was loaded, the peddler informed everyone, and Chem asked if she could offer a prayer for the people of Mullis's hometown before they left. Mullis nodded in agreement, and together they prayed. Yoshio found the scene quite touching, as everyone prayed by the graves. He then noticed the villagers heading back and felt relieved that they were safe, so he went to the kitchen to grab some meat and fruit. When he returned, he looked at the tank to feed the lizard, but it wasn't there. He looked around, wondering where it went, and spotted it on the table. He wondered how it managed to escape the tank and then gave it a piece of meat. Meanwhile, Dold looked at the villagers, each with their unique skills, and commented that they were impressive. As Rhodus counted the money, he remarked that the amount seemed a bit high. Dold explained that he had added extra, knowing that they were blessed by the god of fate, and believed that this would bring growth for the both of them. Yoshio thought he liked this merchant's generosity. Rhodus then asked if any of them would like to move to Dold's village since they were short on people. Dold shared that many villages had been destroyed by monsters in recent years, and his people were looking for a peaceful place to live. The villagers were shocked by this offer, and Yoshio also wondered if leaving the Forbidden Forest would end the game. However, he decided not to influence their decision with a prophecy, preferring to let them choose their own path. Rhodus eventually spoke up, saying they wanted to stay in the forest. He admitted it might sound foolish, but he wanted to live on the land protected by the god of fate. Layla, his wife, agreed to stand by her husband's choice. Mollis added that she also didn't want to leave the place because this is where her brothers had died. They all agreed to stay together in the forest, which made Yoshio happy, knowing that they were content with their decision. Dold then mentioned that he knew some people who would want to live in a place like theirs, as they had been driven from their homes. He expressed hope that everyone would be alright. After shaking hands, Dold promised to return in a few days with the goods they requested, and then departed as everyone waved goodbye. Yoshio felt grateful for everything, so he decided to send the villagers a prophecy. Chem read it aloud. It welcomed Mollis and spoke of how both the goodbyes and new encounters they'd experienced would strengthen them. Everyone was happy to hear the prophecy, and Yoshio felt good seeing their joy. He then thought about the coming winter and how they needed to prepare. Suddenly, he wondered what to name his lizard. He asked if Lizardsaurus was a good name, but the lizard shook its head in refusal. Yoshio then suggested Destiny, since it meant fate in English. Hearing this, the lizard nodded, and Yoshio happily named it Destiny. While sitting in his chair, Yoshio was texting Seika and showed her a carved statue that Carol had made. Seika really liked it. Yoshio's thoughts drifted back to 10 years ago when Seika had landed a job at a big company while he struggled to find work. Out of frustration and embarrassment, he had cut off contact with her and refused to speak to her, feeling irritated and ashamed. Now, he felt guilty about it and wondered if someone like him deserved to talk to her again. Socializing with anyone outside his family had always been difficult for him. As he looked at Gams on his PC screen, he noticed that Gams, though not a great talker, still managed to communicate with others. Yoshio wondered if he could learn something from him. Just then, Carol appeared and asked what Gams was doing. He told her he was planning to go hunting with Mollis. Yoshio noticed that Carol was acting a bit like Chem when it came to Mollis, feeling a little jealous. Gams patted her head and told her that he would be back soon. Yoshio thought to himself that only confident guys could pull something off like that, and realized he probably couldn't learn that skill. Yoshio then looked at Rhodus, thinking that as a regular guy with a wife and child, he probably handled conversations like a proper adult. Rhodus was busy making a list with Layla to give to Dold. He mentioned to Layla that he was happy they'd met Dold, since otherwise he would have had to go to town for shopping. Layla wondered if it was a sign from God, saying he didn't need to push himself, but Rhodus admitted that seeing Gams work so hard, even though Gams was younger, made him feel like he should be doing more. It bothered him to feel so useless. Yoshio understood why Rhodus felt that way, but then Rhodus added with some frustrations that if things continued like this, Carol might end up being swept away by Gams. Yoshio realized this was Rhodus's main concern. Layla comforted him, saying that it was probably already too late and that it wasn't a big deal. Yoshio, feeling a bit useless himself, wondered if he should ask Sayuki for advice, but then she'd probably just laugh at him. Yoshio thought about asking one of his online gaming buddies who was a chick magnet for advice, but then he suddenly remembered that he hadn't given any prophecies yet. Unsure of what to say, he decided to ask the villagers for advice. He sent them a prophecy saying that one of his young male believers was troubled about love and asked for their advice on human relationships. The villagers were a bit confused when they read it, wondering if their god was really asking them about love. Seeing their reactions, Yoshio started to worry that he had made a mistake. What kind of god would consult his followers about romance? He felt like he had lost some of his dignity. But then Carol spoke up, saying that maybe God was accepting requests for love advice. Chem quickly told her to stop talking and not to bother their god with such things. Layla, however, reminded them not to ignore their god's requests, saying it was a rare opportunity for them to repay him for all his support. Mullis admitted she didn't really understand romance. Layla then asked Chem for more details, and Chem explained that the man seemed to have a childhood friend with whom he had a relationship that was more than just friends, but not quite lovers. After Chem finished explaining the whole situation to everyone, Carol excitedly suggested that he just needed to go on a date. Yoshio was surprised at how confidently she said it, but he wasn't sure if things were moving too fast. Chem agreed, adding that instead of having a serious conversation right away, spending enjoyable time together would help close the gap between them. Layla also chimed in, sharing that she and Rhodus went on a date before they got married. Embarrassed, Rhodus asked her not to talk about it in front of everyone. Then Chem asked Mullis what she thought. Mullis explained that in her culture, they take a lot of time to carefully build love, and they rarely make bold moves on each other, so she admitted that she might not be the best person to offer advice. Thinking about dating, Yoshio recalled going out with someone a few times, but he wondered what kind of dates couples actually go on. Chem then added that she would just like someone who could happily stay by her side. Layla teased Rhodus again with a comment about him, making him blush even more. After listening to their conversation, Yoshio felt inspired by the enthusiasm of the villagers, but knew that going on a date wasn't something he could manage just yet. Still, he wondered what kind of message he should send. After thinking it over, he decided to ask her to hang out and sent the message. While waiting for her reply, Yoshio noticed Destiny, his pet, trying to comfort him. Then he finally received a reply. She said it was a weekday and she was busy with work, but suggested he ask again another time. Yoshio got frustrated with himself for not having more experience in social situations, feeling disappointed, but he realized she didn't reject his invitation outright. Trying to calm down, he reminded himself to give it another shot and do his best next time. Yoshio noticed Layla, Carol, and Chem working together, talking about the prophecy and looking concerned. He could tell they were curious about how things turned out, and he wondered if he should share the outcome with them. He decided to send them another prophecy, thanking them for their help and showing his gratitude. The women were happy to read his message, and Yoshio realized they reminded him of his mom and Sayuki, who would get excited over TV dramas. He figured the villagers had been so focused on survival that they hadn't had much time for anything fun or entertaining until now. Seeing them get excited made him happy, and although he felt a bit embarrassed, he thought he might share his love life with them from time to time. The next day, Yoshio sent another prophecy, telling the villagers that his believer had successfully secured an outing, but didn't know where to take her. The villagers were thrilled to read this and got excited about the news. They began discussing possible places like the theater or something similar. Carol excitedly shouted that she wanted to watch a play, and Mullis agreed, saying it wasn't a bad idea. Yoshio realized he had never been to a play before, so he thought a movie might be a good alternative. Looking out the window, he felt the pressure of not wanting to disappoint the villagers if he didn't follow through on their suggestions. He decided he would tell them the outcome, whether it was a success or a failure. He then called Seika and asked if she was free. She replied that it was rare to get a call from him and mentioned that she was free. He asked when her next day off was. The next day, Yoshio gave a prophecy to the villagers, letting them know that their advice had really worked, and he thanked them for their help. He also informed them that the matter of the consultation was now over. He felt a little sorry because everyone had been so excited about the situation, but things had to return to normal. Yoshio thought that if someday the village developed and dangers no longer threatened it, it would be nice if his prophecies could bring peace and entertainment to them. With that thought in mind, he realized he needed to go out and earn some money to support the village and fund his upcoming date, so he stepped out of his room, ready to take action. After finishing work, Yoshio returned home and checked his phone. There was a message from Sayuki. She told him that she had to work overtime and would be coming home late. She asked if he could pick her up from the bus stop. Smiling, he assured her that he would. He thought about getting some candy and juice for himself from the convenience store, so he started looking for his backpack. After searching for a bit, he finally found it. Destiny, his lizard, watched him as he moved around. Yoshio headed to the convenience store and, while there, noticed a boy. He wondered if it was the same person who used to stalk Sayuki. Old memories resurfaced and he thought it might actually be the same guy, especially since this was the guy's hometown. The boy was looking at his phone while sipping hot coffee. Yoshio couldn't help but feel uneasy. Was it really just a coincidence that he saw this boy again right before his sister was about to head home? He considered calling the police, but he knew they would need an actual incident before they could act. Unsure of what to do, and with Sayuki arriving soon, Yoshio didn't want her to feel scared anymore, so he decided to gather his courage and approach the boy to deal with the situation. Yoshio noticed there were two other people standing nearby. He thought about whether he should call out, knowing it would catch their attention. So he asked the boy if he was Yoshinaga. The boy nodded and asked who was speaking. Yoshio reminded him about the situation involving his little sister Sayuki. Realizing who he was, Yoshinaga asked if he was Sayuki's older brother. Yoshio smiled and confirmed it. Yoshinaga immediately bowed his head and apologized for all the trouble he had caused them in the past. Yoshio reassured him that it was all over and mentioned that he might have been too harsh back then. He told Yoshinaga to lift his head. Though Yoshio initially thought about giving him a piece of his mind, he prioritized Sayuki's safety first. So he asked Yoshinaga why he was out so late at night. Yoshinaga explained that this was the only convenience store nearby and he had stopped there after work. Yoshio observed him and realized that, if not for knowing about the past, Yoshinaga seemed like a regular, polite young man. In fact, many people would probably assume Yoshio was the one being suspicious. Yoshio firmly told Yoshinaga to stop going near his sister. Yoshinaga admitted that his feelings for her spiraled out of control, leading to the trouble he caused. Suddenly, Yoshio questioned why he was still stalking her despite the restraining order, mentioning that it was the second time he'd seen him, recalling how Yoshinaga had run away when spotted that night. Although it was a bluff, Yoshinaga fell for it and angrily asked if he'd been found out. Frustrated, Yoshinaga shouted that he was in the same situation as Yoshio after being thrown into such a mess. He threw his coffee can on the ground in anger, blaming Yoshio and Sayuki for ruining his life. Yoshio realized that Yoshinaga wasn't in his right mind and shouted back, telling him to stay away from his sister. Yoshinaga sarcastically mocked him, saying he was scared, and accused Yoshio of trying to get in the way of his sister's free love. Yoshio replied that if Yoshinaga was going to take that attitude, he had other plans. Yoshinaga scoffed, wondering if Yoshio would call the police, bragging that he had plenty of friends from reform school. Yoshio then asked why he was stalking Sayuki. Yoshinaga explained that he genuinely loved her, but didn't have the courage to talk to her. After being arrested, he had thought long and hard about what he should do, but as time went on, his thoughts became twisted, and his feelings grew more obsessive and aggressive. Yoshinaga revealed that now he wanted to make Sayuki cry and beg for mercy. Hearing this, Yoshio hesitated, wondering if he should just leave or run away, but he clenched his fist, determined not to have any more regrets. He decided he wouldn't back down, even if it meant sacrificing himself to stop this guy. Filled with anger, he started walking toward Yoshinaga. Yoshinaga taunted him, saying he couldn't hit him without risking an assault charge, but Yoshio had no intention of hitting him. He had already started recording everything on his phone. Yoshinaga then claimed it was fate, saying that since Sayuki's older brother had shown up on the exact day of his plan, he'd abduct him too. Confused by what Yoshinaga was saying, Yoshio suddenly noticed more people surrounding him and a camera recording the entire scene. Yoshinaga smugly announced that they'd stream it live and it would make for great content. Yoshio realized he was outnumbered, but instead of panicking, he thought about how Gams and the other villagers had fought against monsters. These were just human beings. He knew he had to face them no matter what. One of them pointed out how Yoshio looked buff, and Yoshio thought his muscle training had at least made him appear strong. He then shouted at Yoshinaga, warning him that if he tried anything, he wouldn't get off easy. Yoshinaga just smirked, saying he didn't care, as his friends were part of a violent group and would take care of everything. Looking around, Yoshio noticed they had a knife, a stun gun, and a police baton. His heart raced as two more boys showed up, making it 5 against 1. Stunned, he saw them laughing in his face. Yoshinaga suggested they break his legs first so he couldn't run, but suddenly one of the boys started coughing and struggling to breathe. Within seconds, all of them were coughing loudly, collapsing to the ground unconscious. Yoshinaga, shocked, asked Yoshio what he had done. Yoshio, just as confused, told him to take them to the hospital if he didn't want them to die. But before Yoshinaga could react, he too collapsed and fainted. Seeing them all like that, Yoshio checked to make sure they weren't faking it, realizing it was a real abnormal situation. Panicking, he rushed to the convenience store and told them to call the police and an ambulance, explaining that 5 men had collapsed outside. When Sayuki finally arrived at the bus stop, she noticed an ambulance parked nearby. She spotted her brother, Yoshio, being questioned by a police officer. The officer asked if Yoshio had gone to the convenience store for help, and he confirmed. They then asked about his connection to the group of people involved. Yoshio hesitated, explaining that it was a long and complicated story. The officers began inspecting his belongings, and Sayuki approached, asking what had happened. Yoshio told her that the man had collapsed, possibly due to food poisoning, and reassured her that he had already asked their dad to pick her up. As the officer checked Yoshio's backpack, he was startled to find a lizard inside. Yoshio explained that it was his pet lizard Destiny, which he raised at home. The officer, clearly puzzled, said they would need to ask Yoshio more questions at the police station Yoshio told the officer he would give the lizard to his sister first. He handed Destiny to Sayuki and reassured her, "Don't worry, I'll explain everything later." Yoshio went to the police station, and the questioning lasted until morning. He explained the situation and even provided the recording, which luckily stopped right before he threatened Yoshinaga. After being released, he stepped outside, feeling relieved as he saw the morning sunlight. His dad and Sayuki were there waiting for him, asking if he was okay. Sayuki asked if he was skipping work, but then she explained that they were worried and came to pick him up. She apologized for dragging him into the whole mess, but he told her it was fine. Their dad suggested they head home, saying it wasn't the right place to have a long conversation in front of the police station. As they sat in the car, Yoshio wondered how to explain everything. Gathering his courage, he told them the truth. The guy involved was Yoshinaga, Sayuki's stalker. Sayuki was shocked, shouting that he hadn't changed at all and had become even worse. Their dad calmly asked her to relax and told Yoshio he would talk to him about it later. Yoshio felt sad hearing his dad's tone, sensing the disappointment, but he couldn't help but wonder what might have happened to him and Sayuki if the guys hadn't collapsed. As Yoshio was lost in thought, his dad told him that he did his best to protect his sister and that he was proud of him. Hearing this, Yoshio teared up. His dad, who usually didn't believe in anything, joked that even though he was an atheist, he couldn't deny that it seemed like some kind of blessing that all those guys got paralyzed by food poisoning. Yoshio thought it was being treated as food poisoning for now since the men had eaten oysters to celebrate and it was possible they'd eaten something contaminated. However, the way they were itching and choking made Yoshio think it was more like poison gas, something that affected them, but not him. They finally reached home and his mother, clearly stressed, quickly asked if he was okay. Yoshio reassured her, telling her to relax and that there was nothing to worry about. Afterward, he went to his room and saw Destiny, his pet lizard, sitting there for a moment. He wondered if Destiny might have been responsible for what happened to those guys, but he quickly dismissed the thought as impossible. Feeling drained, he sat down at his PC and checked on the village. He changed his shirt and watched the villagers working hard, smiling to himself. He thanked them in his heart, knowing that their support had given him the courage to protect his little sister. Exhausted from everything that had happened, Yoshio considered going to sleep even though it was morning. Deciding it was the best option, he lay down on his bed and quickly drifted to sleep. In the afternoon, Yoshio woke up to his mother calling out, asking if he was awake. As he went downstairs, he wondered if there was another parcel delivery, but his mother told him that there was a guest and she had already served some snacks in the guest room. When he entered, he was surprised to see Seika sitting there with Sayuki. A bit taken aback, he wondered if Seika hadn't gone to work. Seika explained that Sayuki had told her about the incident and she was so worried, so she decided to take the day off. Yoshio sat down and reassured them that he was fine. It had been a long time since the three of them had sat together like this, and he appreciated the moment. Yoshio asked Seika how much she knew about the incident. She replied that Sayuki had told her the whole story, how they planned to kidnap her, and how Yoshio showed up and saved the day. Sayuki noticed he seemed a bit upset and asked why, even though the stalker situation had already been resolved. He reassured her that everything was fine, but explained that the guys were currently in the hospital and might be arrested since their smartphones had messages revealing their plans. Hearing that, Sayuki felt relieved and expressed how happy she was. Yoshio reminded her to come to him immediately if anything like that happened again. She blushed slightly and thanked him, calling him big brother. Seika, smiling, commented that it seemed like they were getting along well now. Both Sayuki and Yoshio agreed. Suddenly, Seika asked Yoshio if they could be friends again. He was a bit confused, remembering how he had purposely avoided her 10 years ago, so he thought it wouldn't be fair. He apologized for rejecting her back then, and said if she was willing, he'd be happy to be friends again, just like the old days. She smiled and told him she forgave him. Yoshio admitted he thought she hated him completely. Seika reassured him, saying there was no way she could ever hate him. She explained that she had left home because of a job transfer, and even when she had chances to visit, she often left again for work reasons like business trips. As she was about to say more, she stopped, realizing it was a bit awkward with Sayuki sitting there too. She quickly changed the subject, but then quickly noticed a lizard behind Yoshio and screamed in fear. Yoshio realized it was Destiny and wondered how it had escaped again. Sayuki wondered if she could hold it, so he handed it to her. Meanwhile, Seika, looking nervous, told him to keep it away. Yoshio realized she disliked reptiles and amphibians since childhood. Yoshio teased Seika by pretending to bring the lizard closer to her, causing her to scream loudly and tell him to stop acting like a child, reminding him that she'd hated that about him for years. Seeing this, Sayuki burst into laughter, and Yoshio quickly apologized with a grin. Meanwhile, Yama was in a bad mood playing his video game. His frustration grew when one of his bases was destroyed in a surprise attack. He couldn't stop thinking about all the time and money he had invested in the game, which only made him angrier. Touching his mobile screen, he muttered angrily, "Yoshio." The next scene, Dol returned to the village, greeting everyone and announcing that he had brought the items they had requested, along with some people interested in moving in. He introduced them as Kan and Ran, members of the panda race. Yoshio was a bit confused at first, wondering how everyone would react. To his surprise, they were warmly welcomed, with Carol excitedly commenting on how fluffy they were. Dol explained that Kan and Ran had skills in processing lumber, stones, and metals. Kan and Ran mentioned that they had lived in caves with dwarves, where they had been learning these skills. Yoshio was pleased to see their crafting abilities and thought it would be great for the village's growth. He found their presence soothing just to look at. A few days later, the village had run out of room in the cave, so they expanded the fenced area. Kan and Ran built a hut for themselves and were now working with Rhodus and Gams to construct a food storehouse. Yoshio also noticed that Kan and Ran were skilled with spears, often sparring with each other for training. He then saw Mullis harvesting herbs with the girls. Later, Yoshio opened his drawer and looked at the drug he had received from the village. Unsure if it was safe, he decided not to use it and kept it as a good luck charm instead. Despite his concerns, he felt happy with the village's preparations for the evil god's temptation. He thought that if he could keep up with his work, he might earn enough points to summon another golem. With that in mind, he was filled with excitement and eagerly looked forward to the end of the month. The next day, after finishing their morning shift, Yoshio's boss informed the team that after lunch, they would need to move to the next site, and after a short break in the van, they'd head to their night shift. Yoshio felt exhausted just hearing it. With the end of the year approaching, the number of requests had increased, and some days they started in the morning and didn't finish until 4 in the morning. His body was reaching its limit, but he didn't want to quit, even though the urge to skip work was growing stronger. When Yoshio got home, his mother welcomed him and asked if he was skipping dinner. He said he was too sleepy and would go straight to bed. As soon as he got to his room, he collapsed onto his bed, thinking about how hard it is for people who work every day and how they should be appreciated more. He quickly fell asleep and woke up the next morning. Still not wanting to get out of bed, he glanced at the village through his screen. He noticed Carol offering him her favorite fruit and praying for everyone's safety during the evil god's temptation. Seeing her, Yoshio felt determined. He sat up, thinking it was time to start getting prepared. Yoshio went back to work, and while working, he suddenly heard someone behind him, saying he wasn't focused on his job. He apologized and turned around, realizing his boss was actually talking to Yama, not him. The boss asked Yama what was going on, mentioning that he had been looking tired lately. He suggested Yama take a day off if he wasn't feeling well. Yama insisted he was fine, saying it was just a lack of sleep and that he needed the money. Yoshio thought Yama had been acting strange recently. He used to be more cheerful during breaks, but now, he was always glued to his video game and didn't chat much at all. During the break, Yoshio was playing a game on his phone when Yama came up behind him and commented that he seemed really into it. Yoshio smiled and said he was just playing a bit during his free time. As Yama passed by, he mentioned that the game he was playing involved crushing enemy bases and increasing the number of monsters he could control by paying. Yama explained that in the game, he played the role of a villain, destroying villages, and he was set up as an evil god with the goal of wiping out humanity. Yoshio was shocked to hear this. Yama continued, explaining that the game had a system where you could earn points by defeating enemies, and pouring money into it made those points increase faster. He admitted that most of his wages were being spent on those in-game purchases, which explained his recent behavior. Yoshio started wondering if the Village of Fate had a system where someone could play as the evil god, because he had sensed the presence of other players, especially after seeing Mullis with that mysterious book. Meanwhile, Yama continued talking about his game, saying that it offered rewards. He explained that when he took down enemy bases, he earned tons of points, which could be converted into real money. He mentioned that he once made 5 million yen from it. Yoshio was stunned by this revelation. Yama went on, explaining that he had used that money to pay off the debt his father had left before disappearing. He had even dropped out of high school to work and pay off his debt. With bitterness, Yama vented about how his teenage years and early adulthood were sacrificed to pay off something he had no control over. But then Yama smiled, saying he was grateful to have found a temporary source of income through the game. He had managed to pay off most of the debt by playing. Yoshio, however, was left feeling confused, wondering why Yama was telling him all of this so suddenly. Yama looked directly into Yoshio's eyes and said, the dual-wielding swordsman with scars on his face, hoping Yoshio would understand. In that moment, Yoshio realized Yama was talking about Gams. It hit him. Yama was the evil god in the Village of Fate. They had unknowingly been playing against each other this whole time, and now, if one of them lost, their game would be over for good. As Yama walked away, Yoshio couldn't help but wonder if Yama had shared this story as a way of signaling him to quit the game. But he also realized that for Yama, this game might have been a source of hope during difficult times. Yet the same was true for him. Ever since he started playing Village of Fate, his life had changed. He'd started making progress in his work and personal life and had formed a connection with the villagers he'd come to care for. Thinking about how much the game had improved his life and how much he cared for his villagers, Yoshio knew he couldn't let them die. He resolved to fight back against Yama, no matter what. On December 30th, the boss thanked Yoshio for his hard work and expressed hope that they could continue working together in the new year. Everyone exchanged cheerful greetings except for Yama, who remained quiet. As they dropped Yoshio off, he hoped that they could all get along in the future. He then remembered that the next day would be the evil god's temptation, and though he didn't want to fight Yama, he knew he had no choice. When he arrived home, he recalled that his family had gone to visit his grandfather. Suddenly, he heard a voice welcoming him back. Confused, he walked into the kitchen and saw Seika cooking. Smiling, she told him that the food would be ready soon. He wondered why she was there. Seika explained that his mother had asked her to take care of him while they were away. She then asked if he wasn't hungry. He smiled and said he was starving, silently thanking his mother for helping him out. Suddenly, he noticed that Destiny was also there. He wondered how it had escaped again, so he picked it up and started talking to it. Seika, not realizing he was speaking to Destiny, asked what was wrong. He replied that it was nothing and explained that he had made a deal with Destiny. It would stay in his room because Seika didn't like lizards, and in return, he would bring it double the food it usually got. After that, they sat down at the table to eat. Seika asked him how the food tasted, and he told her it was really delicious. He then asked her to teach his little sister how to cook, but she replied that she had been improving her cooking skills and had been visiting for lessons as well. Yoshio was shocked to hear that because he had no idea about it. She then asked him if she could drive him tomorrow. He told her that he would be grateful, but added that she didn't need to feel obligated. If it wouldn't take too much time, he would appreciate it. She replied that she had a lot of free time on her hands and asked if they could eat soba noodles for New Year's Eve. He agreed, wondering if it would be okay to enjoy a meal when the evil god's temptation was coming up. On December 31st, the day had finally arrived. He was using his PC and looking at the stressed faces of his villagers, he asked Destiny if they could get through this. It was 1 p.m. when Mullis informed the village that 5 black dogs and 5 ferocious boars were approaching. Yoshio noticed a notification that showed the evil god's temptation had begun. The monsters were running toward the village. Mullis shot one of the dogs with her arrow, causing the others to scatter in fear of her bow, making it harder to defend the village. Suddenly, some monsters fell into the pits, and Yoshio felt excited, thinking that his plan was working. Last week, during his prophecy, he had suggested setting up the pitfall. He noticed that the boars could only charge straight ahead, so the monsters were falling into the pit, while the dogs tried to jump over the fence. Gams, with the help of Pan and Ran, managed to take down one of the dogs. Yoshio felt relieved seeing that there was now no risk compared to before when only Gams could fight. After clearing the first wave of monsters, Gams told everyone to set up some pitfalls again. Yoshio watched them follow his instructions and thought the monsters might not fall for the pits a second time. He also wondered if Yama could give commands to his monsters. Looking outside the window, he thought the monsters would get stronger as night approached, so they needed to conserve their stamina as much as possible for the evening. After a while, the second and third waves of monsters appeared, and they were finally able to defend against them successfully. Chem was giving water to the group, and Rodus asked if he could take over the lookout shift. Yoshio thought everything was going smoothly, and since he still had a reserve golem, he believed he could settle everything before Seika stopped by in the night. Yoshio wondered what Yama was doing and thought about calling him. However, he realized they were battling against each other, so Yama might think he was trying to provoke him. After an hour had passed without any attacks, Yoshio started to wonder if there would be any more. He thought they must have given up, and he expected more from Yamamoto. Suddenly, he felt someone was downstairs. Thinking it might be Seika, he went down to the kitchen, but couldn't see anyone. But just then, he spotted a burglar. Yoshio was about to call the police when he noticed the burglar's hair. He was shocked, realizing it was really Yamamoto. A few months ago, Yama received a letter and wondered what it was. As he read it, he realized it was about a game called Destruction Impulse, and that he had been selected as a beta tester. He questioned whether he had actually applied for it or not. After scanning the code, he downloaded the game and was shocked by the graphics. He thought it would become very popular soon. Yama was curious about the game's mechanics, which allowed him to create monsters and attack enemy bases. However, he realized he couldn't control the monsters, so he decided to pass on the game. Suddenly, the owner of the house appeared outside and shouted Yama's name. Yama opened the door and asked him to calm down. The man demanded to know when Yama would pay the rent and settle his debt. Yama asked if he could pay using his mobile phone. The man agreed that it would be fine, and Yama quickly paid everything he owed. The man was curious about where Yama got all that money, but Yama replied that it didn't matter. He assured the man that he would make sure not to be late with payments in the future. The man then walked away and Yama smirked to himself, thinking that this game really deposited cash into his account. He ignored the game for a while, but when he realized that the points he earned from raiding small enemy bases could be converted into real cash, he started playing it more and more. It felt like a dream come true, as he could actually make money by playing a game. He was excited because he thought he could pay off his debts using this game. He was working in the store when his boss mentioned they had a newcomer named Yoshio. When Yama looked at him, he noticed Yoshio had a nice physique, but his face looked pale and unhealthy. Yama thought Yoshio seemed motivated, but since the job was pretty intense, he figured that he might quit soon. However, he soon realized that Yoshio was doing his job enthusiastically and responding well, which made Yama happy to have a good junior. Later, when Yama was at home playing the game, he encountered a situation in the last Evil God's Temptation where his monsters got annihilated by a wooden man. He was shocked by its strength and thought he should have brought a red Cyclops. The next day, while Yama and Yoshio were talking during their break, Yama discovered that Yoshio was a gamer and thought they could be friends. However, when Yama returned home, he found that his base had been destroyed and even his Cyclops had been killed. He saw a swordsman with a sword and realized that he was the one who had done it. Yama felt a surge of anger as he realized that this was a counterattack from Yoshio, who had raided his cave recently. After that day, as they were returning home, Yoshio was playing a game on his mobile. Yama wondered what game it was when he suddenly saw a man with a scar on his face and a sword in his hand. He realized it was the same game and Yoshio was on the opposing side. Yama asked Yoshio if this was a new game and wondered if Yoshio had noticed him playing and had been secretly laughing at him while pretending to be friendly at work. Yama's anger grew more and more over time, and he decided to confront Yoshio about it when the event was near. During the event, as Yama played the game, he thought he would turn things around and not let anyone get in his way. Suddenly, his monsters fell into a pit, and he felt angry seeing the strength of Yoshio's base. He realized it had really improved and had wasted too much time stressing and smoking cigarettes. It saddened him to think that he wouldn't be able to damage such clever defenses. He wanted to spend money to instantly boost his forces, but he remembered that Yoshio still had that wooden man up his sleeve. Yama wondered what he should do. Suddenly, he thought about what if Yoshio couldn't even play for a while. He tried to calm himself down, realizing if he acted like this, it would go against everything he had worked for in his life. He believed he still had a chance of winning, especially as night approached, which would improve the abilities of his monsters. He looked at his empty cigarette pack and decided to head out and buy something from the store to cool off. When he opened the door, he saw a strange man asking if he believed in God. Yama told him to leave, saying he was busy. Looking at the man's appearance, Yama pointed out that he didn't seem like someone from a religious background. The man smirked and said he believed in gods, but only the evil ones, as he waved his hand dismissively in front of Yama's face, leaving him in shock. In the present, Yoshio asked the burglar if he was Yamamoto. The burglar then unmasked himself, revealing his identity, and wondered how he had recognized him. Yoshio asked Yama what he was doing there and told him to put the crowbar down. Yama said Yoshio already knew why he was there. Yoshio asked if it was to mess with his game, and Yama replied that if he didn't take action, he wouldn't have to get rough with him, and suggested Yoshio quietly wait for the evil god's temptation to finish. Yoshio told him that he was committing a crime and that he should stop being foolish. Yama wondered if, by casually asking, Yoshio would stop playing the game. Yoshio said he couldn't do that. Hearing this, Yama smirked and said he would just claim he came to a coworker's house to hang out after getting drunk, and that the crowbar was something he found in Yoshio's garden shed. Yoshio told him that excuse wouldn't work. Yama laughed and asked if anyone in society would believe Yoshio's version of the story. His words hit Yoshio hard, making him realize how isolated he'd been for the past decade. Meanwhile, Yama had been working and socializing for so long that no one would believe Yoshio's side of the story. Yama told him that he didn't want to hurt him or get a criminal record and asked Yoshio to just give in and lose the game. He even offered to split half the money from the raid so they could both profit. Yoshio thought about it. If he didn't oppose Yama, he'd get some money and maybe they could go back to being friendly like before. Yoshio began to reflect on how much the game had influenced his life. He looked at Yamamoto seriously and questioned whether he felt any guilt about killing the villagers in the game. He wondered aloud if Yama ever thought twice about destroying characters that appeared so lifelike. Yamamoto, taken aback, admitted that while the game felt realistic, it was still just a game to him. Yoshio, however, wasn't satisfied. He asked if Yama ever felt any pain when seeing news of civilians dying in real-life conflicts. Though Yoshio himself wasn't usually affected by such news, he couldn't help but feel that the NPCs in the game put in as much effort to live as real people did, making them more than just fictional characters in his eyes. Yoshio asked if he would reconsider his actions, but Yama was shocked, thinking Yoshio was being foolish. Yama explained that he'd been suffering too, born into a dysfunctional family and having dropped out of high school. He angrily asked if Yoshio understood the value of money, pointing out that Yoshio had probably never considered how much his family had spent to support him for a year. Yama, full of frustration, demanded if Yoshio had ever truly understood that. Hearing all of this, Yoshio felt sad as he realized he had always blamed his misfortune and society for all his problems. He now recognized that he had never appreciated how much he was blessed and had only been making excuses for himself. Yama, still angry, told Yoshio that for someone like him, without education or any exceptional talent in school, this game was his one chance. He shouted that he fully understood how bleak life could be without graduating from a good university. Hearing all of Yama's words, Yoshio remained silent, unable to respond. His entire life flashed through his mind, and he clenched his fists as tears began to fall. Yama, surprised, asked why he was crying, saying that he should be the one crying. Yoshio, through his tears, told Yama that he was remarkable. Yama thought Yoshio was being sarcastic, but Yoshio explained that he wasn't. He admitted that he had failed to realize how blessed he was, despite wasting the past decade doing nothing. He acknowledged that he had been a burden to many people and regretted not finding the courage to change earlier. Yama laughed loudly, brushing it off as cheap sympathy, and then showed Yoshio his phone screen, pointing out that the final stage of the evil god's temptation had begun. Seeing the overwhelming number of monsters approaching the village, Gams and the villagers were shocked and terrified. Yama, with a smug grin, told Yoshio that he had spent all his money and deployed every troop he had, knowing that if he couldn't possibly destroy Yoshio's village, it would be game over for him. As Yoshio tried to grab his phone, Yama raised the crowbar near him, warning him not to move. Yoshio wondered how he could save his villagers. Just then, Seika appeared, hearing the commotion and asking if any of Yoshio's friends had come over, since she heard loud voices. Yoshio panicked, shouted at her to stay away. When Seika entered and saw Yamamoto, she was stunned, thinking he was a burglar. Yama, in a fit of rage, swung the crowbar toward her. In a split second, Yoshio jumped in between them, taking the blow himself. The impact sent him crashing to the floor. Yama called Yoshio an idiot, blaming him for everything. Yoshio, in pain, shouted at Seika to run away. She told him she would go get help. Hearing this, Yama tried to grab her, but Yoshio pulled at his leg, causing Yama to sneer, wondering if Yoshio just wanted to look cool in front of her. Furious, Yama hit Yoshio again with a crowbar, telling him to stop interfering. Seika screamed for Yama to stop, and suddenly, Yama's arms went numb. He couldn't move them. Shocked, he wondered what was happening, and then noticed a small yellow lizard in front of him. He realized it might be the cause and told it to stay away, but before he could react, Yama collapsed to the floor, just like Yoshinaga and his friends had earlier. Seika immediately rushed to Yoshio's side, but then Destiny, the lizard, jumped onto her. She screamed in fear, and as Destiny crawled on her, she fainted. Yoshio, now unable to move or speak, watched helplessly. Destiny pulled out a potion that Mullis had made and poured it into Yoshio's mouth. As soon as he drank it, Yoshio felt a surge of energy, and his injuries quickly healed. He ran to Seika, relieved to find that she wasn't hurt, just unconscious. He then looked at Yama and realized he was in the same state as Yoshinaga had been, confirming that Destiny was behind everything. Worried, Yoshio grabbed his phone, anxiously checking to see what had happened to his village in the game. Yoshio saw on his phone that a horde of monsters was approaching. Gams, in a panic, shouted for everyone to rush inside the cave. They all hurried in, trying to figure out what to do next. The monsters were already starting to break through the fence. Gams told them it was only a matter of time before it would be completely destroyed. Chem reminded them that they still had the protection of the God of Fate, but Gams, filled with regret, said he had promised to protect everyone, and now he felt that wasn't possible. Carol, confused and worried, asked what was happening. Mullis handed her a small potion and told her it would help her calm down. Carol drank it, finding it sweet, and within seconds, she fainted. Layla gently held Carol, thanking Mullis for calming her down and saying that now her daughter wouldn't have any more frightening thoughts. Tears filled her eyes. But suddenly, Chem suggested that they might still be able to save at least one person. The others looked at her, confused, as she explained that they hadn't offered a tribute to the god of fate that day. If they sent Carol as a tribute, Chem believed there might be hope. Everyone was shocked, unsure if it was even possible to offer a person as tribute. Gam, seeing no other option, said they had no time, so they had to try it. Layla placed Carol in front of the statue of the god of fate, asking for his care and forgiveness for their failure. Suddenly, a bright light filled the cave as the Summon Golem ability activated. They were stunned to see a massive golem appear, holding Carol. Yoshio had finally activated it. Everyone was thrilled as the golem began moving toward the monsters. Yoshio realized the monsters were surrounding the cave, so he decided to use the golem to fight them all. He didn't care if he had to burn through all of his fate points to win. He rushed outside with the golem, charging through the monsters and taking them down. Gams cheered, encouraging everyone to follow the god of fate. As Yoshio continued, he noticed 3 red cyclops among the horde. He decided to handle the larger monsters himself, leaving the smaller ones for the others. Facing the 3 cyclops, he knew fighting them all at once would be tough. He ran around, kicking up dust so he could hide in the smoke, using it to take stealthy shots at them. Switching to a long-range view, he could see his targets more clearly. He began striking from a distance, managing to kill one of the cyclops. He dodged the attacks from the remaining 2 and then quickly countered, taking out another. Now it was down to a one-on-one fight. Both charged at each other. When the cyclops swung its weapon, Yoshio dodged and immediately struck back, delivering a fatal blow to its face and killing it. Yoshio shouted with excitement, celebrating with everyone as they had all defeated the smaller monsters. The group cheered, feeling victorious. However, Yoshio suddenly heard an alert from Yama's phone. Curious, he picked it up and saw a game over notification, along with a message saying that all of Yama's memories would be erased. Shocked, Yoshio realized that Yama had never been informed of this. It was hard for him to believe, but he wondered if Yama would really forget everything that had happened today. Despite his thoughts, Yoshio felt a sense of relief knowing that Yama wouldn't remember the harm he had caused the villagers. He also wondered if Yamamoto's behavior was a result of the game driving him crazy. Suddenly, Yama woke up, confused, saying it was getting late and asking where he was. Yoshio was stunned and asked if Yama had already forgotten. Yoshio quickly made up a story, telling Yama they were having a year-end party at his house and he had fallen asleep. Yama confirmed, saying he couldn't really remember much except that a suspicious man had appeared at his house in the evening and used some kind of hypnosis on him. Yama seemed puzzled as he struggled to remember if he'd been drinking at Yoshio's place. Hearing this, Yoshio was shocked. Could someone have been controlling Yama to make him lose the game? The thought troubled him deeply. Yama asked if he had broken anything while drunk, offering to pay for any damages. Yoshio, still in shock, wondered if there were really people who would go to such extremes for a game. He forced a smile and reminded Yama that he had plans for the new year. Yama agreed, apologizing for causing trouble, and said he would head home. Yoshio wished him a happy new year as Yama left. Turning to Seika, Yoshio checked to see if she was all right. She opened her eyes, gently holding his face and asking if he was okay. She looked around, confused, and asked about the lizard. Yoshio reassured her, telling her to calm down and that he wasn't hurt. He joked about her being exhausted from all the cleaning for the year end. To keep things simple, he explained that she might have had a nightmare. Seika nodded, agreeing that it must have been a dream, otherwise she wouldn't be unharmed. She mentioned the lizard from the nightmare, unaware that Destiny was actually hiding behind Yoshio's hair. Seika then started preparing their next meal, and together they celebrated the new year peacefully. A few weeks later, Yoshio observed that Yama's behavior had returned to normal. He was working diligently, no longer possessed by the dark influence that had affected him before. Meanwhile, the villagers had also rebuilt their homes and the facilities that were destroyed during the evil god's temptation. Life in the village had returned to a peaceful state and everyone seemed content. Carol, with a bright smile, proudly showed off a new carved figure she had made to offer to the god of fate. Chem, however, was a bit annoyed upon seeing it, but despite that, the village was thriving once more. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Sayuki and her dad were there, and they had come to see the lizard. Sayuki mentioned that if they uploaded photos of the adorable lizard on social media, it would definitely go viral. However, Yoshio quickly told her that she couldn't do that, explaining that the lizard was a specialty of the village, selectively bred. He thought to himself that if the world where Gams and the others lived truly existed, everything strange that had happened would make sense. But if it was just a game, he had no real explanation. He wondered why a game would be connected to another world called the Village of Fate and why it had come to him. He also reflected on what Yama had hinted about another player, leaving him still confused. The next day, Seika came by his house, ready to go out with him. His mother playfully teased him, asking if he was going on a date. Seika explained that they were just going out to have some sweets, and her mother jokingly said she wanted to join them, but she quickly added that she shouldn't interrupt a special moment between two people. Yoshio quickly denied it, saying there was nothing like that and that he was just escorting her. They stepped outside and he asked if they should get going. Seika smiled and agreed, and they walked off together. And so this was the story of how Yoshio, a neet for 10 years, became the god of fate and saved the villagers, and how in turn, the village of fate saved him.